All right, welcome to another episode of Talkin Ball live with Pat Leonard, the New York Daily News NFL columnist and Giants beat writer. Welcome everybody here on June 6th, 2024. We're going to talk about Daniel Jones' beard and his new villain stage. We're going to talk about player injuries and updates to the Giants roster that I saw live with my own eyes in East Rutherford at the Giants training facility at OTA number 9, as OTA practices start to bleed into mandatory minicamp, where we will get a closer look at the team we can expect on the field come this summer in training camp. That said, I need to start by talking to you guys about Malik Nabers. Malik Nabers had the kind of practice and the kind of day today here on June 6th, the Thursday afternoon, on the outdoor fields, a hot and sticky and humid day where it had rained earlier in the day. It was going to rain later. But with the skies having stopped and Drew Lock running the first team offense as Daniel Jones continues to work his way back, Malik Nabers had the kind of day that reminds you why the Giants drafted him in the first place, number 6 overall, when they couldn't make that trade up for the quarterback, but also why a top wide receiver, a number 1 receiver, can be a force multiplier on an offense. Now, what do I mean by a force multiplier? I mean that not only does Nabers look athletic, explosive, talented, has great hands, right? What I'm also talking about is he makes everybody else on the field look better. Like a really good point guard in basketball who can facilitate, can augment the skills of scorers around him, or like a great NBA team as the NBA finals get underway. Luka Doncic, a great player, but if you combine a scorer like that with a playmaker like Kyrie Irving, they multiply each other's talents and the role players around them and how they complement each other. Malik Nabers is the kind of player who could be something like what the Giants need to turn the page from Saquon Barkley to what you hope can become a modern offense, right? An offense that, as much as Saquon Barkley was a key piece of it, and the Giants could end up missing him early, when Nick Sirianni, the Eagles head coach, made a wisecrack about the Giants this week, saying that he likes to trash talk Giant fans and say, well, we have your best player. The Giants, when they have practices like they did on Thursday, they like to look at Malik Nabers burning up the left sideline for a go route touchdown from Drew Lock against Cordell Flott, making a tough catch kind of over his head, two-handed, landing in the end zone. The Giants have not posted this on social media, potentially because he might have landed just out of bounds. But his best catch still hasn't hit Twitter, X, Instagram, YouTube, anything. Nabers made an absolutely ridiculous, acrobatic, leaping catch running from the right to the left side of the end zone on what was really a broken play, with Drew Lock being flushed out of the pocket to his left by a pass rush from Kayvon Thibodeau, and Lock lofting it, giving Nabers a chance to make the play and getting it, hauling it down. It was one of those things where it was so far away from where we were watching in the media, when we were on the opposite end of the field, that you couldn't see from our vantage point whether his toes tapped in or not. But it really didn't matter. It was the kind of play that all of Nabers' teammates ran to him, were congratulating him. A lot of people who were on the field felt like he was in. But the bottom line is he can help a player like Drew Lock, who's trying to become a starter, who has been a career backup. He could help Drew Lock do that if that's what the Giants need. He can unlock players like Jalen Hyatt, Darius Slayton, Wan'Dale Robinson on offense potentially. Now, would it be obviously ideal to have a player like Nabers and Saquon Barkley together so that defenses can't key on one or another? That's where you want to get to as an offense, where you have enough players where teams don't know where to go. Like right now, as much as the Giants have other good players, Nabers is the clear position player that a defense would be double teaming, that a defense would be keying on, saying we have to stop. But really, his explosiveness with the ball, his speed and surge and momentum in and out of breaks as a wideout, really impressive. Like Daniel Jones hit him in the end zone on a 7-on-7 red zone drill as well. Early on in practice, Daniel Jones made a throw on an in cut that was a little too far outside of where Nabers could easily reach it, but he made like an incredible kind of just like reaching catch got his hands out there, all hands, wearing red gloves today, I believe. So those were working for him. And in a week where Justin Jefferson of the Minnesota Vikings signed a record-breaking deal that essentially was a true $35 million a year extension, which makes him the highest paid position player in NFL history, so non-quarterback. And what that did is that doesn't mean every wide receiver is going to get a Justin Jefferson contract here and now. But what it does signal is the significance of the star wide receiver in the NFL market and in the modern offense. Not every team with a star wide receiver goes deep and makes the playoffs. Not every team with a star wide receiver wins Super Bowls. But in the current NFL, top offenses reach the postseason. Many of them with top 10 wide receivers reached the postseason just last year. And the Giants have not had a player who has played the way that Nabers did on the practice field. And I've been covering the Giants since the 2016 season. Odell Beckham Jr. is the last wide receiver, the last player, the last weapon who wasn't a running back carrying the ball that I've seen have the kind of day that Malik Nabers had. Kadarius Toney was a special talent when the Giants drafted him, and we saw in that one Dallas game with Mike Glennon, of all people, throwing to him, what a unique, explosive and dynamic player can suddenly unlock. And that's what Nabers looked like in this practice. Now, does this mean it's going to solve all the Giants' problems right away? Obviously not necessarily, but in the grand scheme of things, this is something we've talked about a lot here on the Talkin Ball Live with Pat Leonard podcast and on these shows and live Q&As with a great fan base, supportive fan base that you guys are just diehards and you love your team. But what we talk about consistently is the fact that over the course of the next several years, the Giants, no matter who their head coach is next year or the year after that, no matter who the GM is the next year or the year after that, if you just zero in on the roster and what a player and talent like Nabers can do for the long haul, like you talk about building blocks, is Kayvon Thibodeau definitely one? You hope so. You're hoping he puts it all together. Is Evan Neal one? It doesn't look like it, right? But you have guys like John Michael Schmitz, Wan'Dale Robinson, second round picks, guys who you want to put it together. You're going to wait and see if they can. They have the chance to. They haven't yet. But Nabers looks like the kind of building block player that 5 years from now, if he continues to mature, continues to do the right thing, if he stays on the field, stays healthy, that this is potentially the kind of building block player that you can look back on, in 2029 and say, man, am I glad that the New England Patriots didn't accept that trade at number 3 overall. So that's my primary takeaway, but there's a ton to talk about, and I'll continue to dive into Nabers while I take all of your questions. So there's a lot to talk about, a lot of insights. I have my practice roster right here, all of my insights from today's practice, and not just about this specific session that we saw on the grass in East Rutherford, but also putting together all of our observations as we continue to move toward mini camp and the break before training camp. Let's take care of our sponsor first, and we'll get to your questions. BetOnline is your number one source for the NBA Finals and Stanley Cup Finals this season. Every stat, every matchup, and even live odds and spreads while the games are being played. When the game is over, head on over to our online casino and get in a game of blackjack or poker, or unwind with one of our over 150 slot games. Head to the website today to get in on the action. Use the promo code BELIEVE, that's BLEAV, for your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. BetOnline, the game starts here. All right, so let's get to your questions. And I have plenty on my list to talk about whether I get asked about it or not, because I really did feel like I saw a lot on the field, depth chart wise, roster wise, who was on the field, who wasn't, etc. As I take a sip of my Hill Rock bourbon, I believe New York made. All right, let's get to Jacob Petruzzi. Jacob kicks us off, as he often does, by saying, smash that like and sub button for Pat on your way in. Jacob, thanks as always for the reminder, for whether it's returning fans and subscribers or people who are new to the channel or to the chat. Subscribing is a great way to have Giants and NFL news delivered right to you here on YouTube. You can throw those notifications on and never miss a beat. In our live chats here, I will get to all of your questions. So if you can be patient, I will get there. If you want to have your comment or question answered first or rise to the top of the queue or chat, you can pay for a super chat or super sticker, but no pressure to do that. If not, all I ask is that you, if you like what you see and hear, hit that like button as you're sitting here, as Jacob is telling you to. That those likes while we are live and those subscriptions while we are live, that drives engagement. It tells everybody out there on YouTube who isn't aware yet, who loves the NFL, who loves football. It could be fantasy football. It could be the Giants. It could be the NFC East, whatever it is that we're talking about it and that we want them in here with us. Thank you, Jacob, for that. Joey B says, what's up, room? Who's watching the NBA finals and who you got winning? Joey B, I think assuming Porzingis plays a bulk of this series, I'm going to go with the Boston Celtics, though the Dallas Mavericks have continually, time and again, these playoffs to prove that they are just going to be a difficult out because, like I said earlier, the two stars plus their role players really stepping up, some great acquisitions. They've gone for it. And Luka, is probably, when all is said and done, I mean, let's be honest, the best player in the series. So it should be a fascinating one. Jay Farries agrees. He thinks it's the Celtics. Joey B says June 22nd, he's at the Stand Comedy Club in New York City, 5 p.m. show. If anyone wants to pop in, go get your tickets ASAP. So please go get those tickets and go see Joey on June 22nd. I will be on vacation then, Joey. Sorry, so I can't make it. But everybody who's in here, if you're in the area, if you're in New York City or if you're in North Jersey, Long Island, wherever the case may be, Westchester, please go check Joey out. He's hilarious and a great supporter of this show. All right. Let's see. D Kit says, how's everyone doing? G-Men says, Pat, my man. Ryan welcomes everybody into the chat. G-Men says, how impressive was Malik Nabers today? I'll just say, G-Men, that it was the kind of performance where I was wondering. So we're going to talk to him next week at mandatory minicamp, but just a behind the scenes thing. A bunch of us on the beat started talking during the practice about, should we ask the Giants for Malik Nabers on the podium right now, like today, here on Thursday? Because to me, he's a confident kid. He believes in himself. He always talks about how, like, he's the real deal. I'm him. Like, that's his attitude, right? And so I thought we might get a really fired up and really confident and revealing and honest Malik Nabers after what was, just a jaw-dropping performance in an OTA practice. I mean, think about it. Everybody loves to joke about how dull and boring and uninteresting OTAs can be and how it's the dragging part of the offseason. And Malik Nabers turned it into a fireworks show, right? Like, that's what we're talking about. But so we talked about whether or not it would be worthwhile to talk to him instead of somebody else who went to the podium today. We ended up deciding that it might be more worthwhile to wait until after or during mandatory minicamp, because for many other reasons, it's closer to training camp. You kind of get to tie a bow on what his whole spring program has been, right, at the end of it, as opposed to prior to it. Obviously, it'd be ideal to be able to just talk to him both times, but wasn't realistic here. But the other thing is that, who knows, Daniel Jones could end up throwing some 11-on-11 passes in mandatory minicamp. And so you would like to find out from Nabers what he thought of that and how that went, if that happens at mandatory minicamp. Jay Farries checks in with $20 super chat. Jay Farries, thank you so much for that. Really appreciate you for dropping that in here. Jay says, hey, Pat, I read some bad press on Twitter about you and had a negative view of you last year. Watching your videos lately, you seem really intelligent and you share your knowledge well, very dedicated. What made you controversial? Jay, really good question. Happy to answer that. Thank you again for the support for the channel. I really do appreciate it sincerely, and do not take it for granted at all. So to answer your question, it started when I joined the beat in 2016. So no matter who I've covered, going back to the Rangers before the Giants, you could ask people with the Rangers, even people, a lot of people there who I have really good relationships with. that I'm fair and I'm honest, but I can also be when it's deserved, right? Like I try to, um, you know, bring accountability to the situation, right? Whether it's coach, GM, player, whether it's myself, if I was wrong about something, right? Also try to be very detail oriented because ultimately what I'm trying to do is educate and inform and entertain the fans, right? Primarily the first two. And so um, when I came on the Giants beat, I was not just so the typical scenario, Jay, is when you come onto a beat and you're a beat writer, you cover the nuts and bolts of a team. And then you have columnists who come in and they weigh in with takes and opinions and stronger voices on the topics of the day, or whether it could be league wide, whether it's the team, whatever it is. In the arrangement we had at the Daily News at the time, I think Manish Mehta was with the Jets, but I became like a Giants beat columnist right off the bat. And so there were people I was working with, whether it was Seth Walder, who was excellent, who's now at ESPN, Daniel Popper, who's excellent, who's now at The Athletic. They were often doing a lot of news work, and I was doing some of that, but ultimately what I was being asked to write was analyses and opinions. And so I have no problem doing that. But I was new. And so instead of spending, let's say, the 3 years on a beat that normally a beat writer would do, just grinding on the details and building the relationships and not weighing in either way on, whether it's praising or criticizing, I came in guns blazing, ready to go. And it just so happened that was when the Josh Brown stuff came down. Like right off the bat, in my first, about a month into covering the Giants, was the whole Josh Brown scandal, fiasco, whatever you want to call it, with the Giants. And so I came right in, and nothing I wrote then is anything I wouldn't write again. So don't get me wrong. I stand behind everything I said. But I think coming in to covering the Giants, being new and coming in with a strong voice, being harsh about how poorly the Giants were handling such a sensitive situation, and really getting to the core of discussing, their double talk, their hypocrisy, their mistakes, their flaws, right? I think right off the bat, both internally and on the outside, I think that set a tone of, if people didn't know who I was, wondering, who is this guy? Why is he saying these things? But again, that's not the normal way somebody would have to come in professionally. But I think I did it to the best of my ability. I don't think anything I said was unwarranted, right? And so that's just an example of how I came in and maybe the tone that was set. I do think, Jay, that because I'm from Philadelphia, there are a lot of people who, if I'm critical, not a lot of people, but there are some people who, when I'm critical of the Giants, they accuse me of having an agenda, right? And there's people, connected to the Giants who say things like that, which is absolutely ridiculous because, I trash the Cowboys, I trash the Eagles, I trash the Niners, I trash the Chiefs, whatever. Like if somebody deserves criticism, they get it from me. And if somebody deserves praise, they get it from me. So, that's not a real thing. I've worked very hard in my career to try to be a journalist with integrity and have a perspective that I hope reflects like some intelligence and some thought and a lot of research and insight. And then, Jay, I think really it comes down to, so Mike Garafolo told a story on Jordan Raadan's Breaking Big Blue podcast a few years ago that resonated with me. He said that he was fortunate that he came in covering the Giants at a time where they weren't great right away when he joined the beat, but they were an ascending team. And he was here to cover, championship runs, Super Bowls, some of the greatest Giants to ever play on the team, most revered Giants to ever play on the team. And, I, on the other hand, or, you could look at it, Jordan, the same way, but I, on the other hand, came in at a time where the Giants were hitting the skids and we're about to and have gone through a run of, just dumping a head coach every 2 years, not even waiting 2 years. In some cases, right? You had the whole Eli Manning situation, which was another reason, Jay. Like I was somebody who was saying early that what I was seeing on the field was not the Eli Manning who he had been previously, which is something Eli Manning admitted about 4 years or 3 years after his retirement. But at the time, a lot of Giants fans, because of what Eli meant to the franchise, were very defensive about that. So those are just some examples of where I feel like I've taken stands based in what I'm seeing and hearing and talking to my sources and trying to be objective about it, but also vehement in defense of my points. And I think whether it's, somebody who wants to defend the Giants at all costs, or feels like they're beyond reproach, or just someone who grew up with them and around them and is a fan of them and doesn't want something bad to be said about them or critical about them, it ends up kind of, grading some people. But I think by and large, when I've covered the team over from 2016 to now to 2024, the Giants, for the most part, haven't been a good team. And so that just has resulted in a lot of, coverage, whether it's the conversations I have league wide or with the Giants, or the writing I do or the talking I do about them. A lot of times it's about what's wrong and how to fix it. Right. And I think it's gotten tiresome for Giants fans, which I totally understand. I mean, it's tiresome to constantly hear your team's not doing things the right way. Then they, fire another general manager, another coach, and then they bring the new ones in. And as a fan, you really want to, believe, especially when there's change, that things are going to change for the better. But it's not always the case. So it gets tiresome, like new regime. Wait, here we go again. They're not doing the right. So, but it's not my job to praise when something's going wrong. And it's also not my job to criticize if things are going well. It's my job to, get into the details and the facts and the truths of what's happening with the team and with the league, and to try to bring my perspective to it. And what I say is not always going to be like objectively right. Like sometimes people say like, oh, they'll debate like that what you're saying is, that there's validity to what you're saying. And it's like, well, first of all, I'm trying to relay to you what I saw happen or what I hear, or whatever it is. But it's also like, sometimes it's my perspective. And so I hope that my experience and my work ethic reflect a perspective that is worthwhile of people to take in and appreciate. But Jay, not everybody feels that way. I hope that answers your question. Thank you for asking that, Matt, asking me that. I appreciate it. All right, let's see. Ryan says, Pat, can you give us your overall sentiment in terms of the team coming together and trusting Daboll? Perhaps too early to assess. And Jay Farris, thanks again for that massive super chat there. I really appreciate you. So Ryan, I think so far as a response to Daboll, he was on the walkie-talkie again. So some of these practices, he's just been standing there behind the huddle, giving the signals, but they're just basically standing there talking to the quarterback as they huddle up. This practice, he was standing around them and near the huddle, but he also had the walkie-talkie, the radio, and he was calling it into the quarterback's headsets. Very clear that he's going to be the play caller. He hasn't announced that, obviously, but I've been telling you guys that since January, that's the expectation. So nothing to doubt there. As far as trusting Daboll, Ryan, I mean, they're just saying like blanket statements right now. I think that the players, from what I've seen at practice, like the team is playing hard, right? At practice so far, I see a pretty vanilla defensive scheme from what I can tell. Deonte Banks talked about how he thought it was less aggressive than Wink Martindale's scheme today, which is something I absolutely agree with, have been telling you guys about. The biggest thing I could say about Daboll right now, the biggest takeaway I could present to you on the players' response to him is that, they have no choice. This is a season where, like Jalen Hyatt today said that the Giants are a playoff team in his opinion. And John Runyon Jr. made some comment about trying to get into the big dance or go to the big dance, right? In reference to the playoffs and the Super Bowl. And I think Brian Daboll is clearly, at this time of year, he's typically the kind of coach that a team is enjoying because they are handling things in a way that is player friendly. Now there's 11 on 11 going on this spring compared to last year. So they have made that change. So there is some urgency, clearly, as we talked about last time, from Daboll on down about how they're approaching the offseason compared to previous years. From what I hear, from talking to people, I think the biggest thing I would say is that the defense, I would like to see more from the defense. Brian Burns has been encouraging and exciting, right? It's not full pads, it's not real football yet. But as far as how is this all going to come together, Neighbors gave us the first flash of, there's something special out here potentially, right? But I guess my best response to you, Ryan, is you're right. It is too early to tell just based on, rookie minicamp, 3 open OTA practices, those types of things. But I will say this, Ryan, a lot of this team is newer than I think people recognize. And not you, but I mean, as far as how to respond to Daboll, like they're really still putting all this together right now. You think about it, they have their two most, two of their biggest signings are on the offensive line and brand new guys to the team trying to work in and ramp up so that they can be ready week 1. Malik Nabers is their most important offensive weapon. He's a rookie who basically just got here. Their starting running back, Devin Singletary, just got here. Their best tight end is pretty much retired, it appears. Their secondary is one of the younger, less experienced in the league. They have practices like today's where Micah McFadden was on the side with like the either injured rehab or resting group, right? Like running some jogging, running some sprints, doing stuff, not practicing. And you have Carter Coughlin out there. So that's a good opportunity for Carter Coughlin, but it's also one less practice Micah McFadden spending with the defense, right? So, I guess that's to put a bow on it, Ryan. I think my takeaway right now, and I left out the most important thing, that while Daniel Jones continues to rehab, the guy running the offense right now is brand new to the team, and Drew Lock, and he's learning the offense, right, for the first time, with Brian Daboll now calling the plays for the first time. So it's so new defensive coordinator. It's so new. And think about this. I'll post a video later. They're working on the new kickoffs now, the new kickoff rule. So much is new. Like, this is so different from last year's Giants team. But is that going to be a good thing or a bad thing? That's what we'll see, Ryan. I hope that answers the question. I think we'll learn more as we go into mandatory minicamp next week and training camp. Ultimately, it's going to come down to game day is really the time that Daboll has kind of shape-shifted into somebody who wasn't getting as positive of a response. D Kit checks in with a $10 super chat. D Kit, thank you, man, as always. Pat, what I think is mandatory reporting for you every week is the Daboll eruption meter. 1 being gentle Daboll and 10 being Daboll 2023 version. Just let us know if he looks ready to blow. D Kit, that's a great point, because not only was that a problem on game days, obviously, but also going back in practices we've seen in previous years, we've seen him yell over at the sideline, seemingly at Mike Kafka at one point. Maybe in the first year, there's another time I think Mike Groh, the receivers coach, appeared to be on the end of it. And definitely something that as the pressure rises, you could probably see and bet on more and more, potentially even at press conferences, depending on how tense it gets. I think it's going to be a results-oriented meter there, D-Kit. But I think that's a really good point by you and something that deserves to be tracked. No question about it. Jay Farries checks in with another $12 super chat. Thank you, Jay Farries, man. Really appreciate it. He says, thank you. What do you think with your experience about guys like yourself who walk the beat for a decade, go to college, etc., and these guys who show up on Twitter who are content creators? What's the difference? Well, Jay, I would say this. There are plenty of people like this. I'm not going to sit here and say I'm better than somebody else, right? Like, I'm not going to do that. I'm just trying to do my best and then be somebody that, you guys can listen to, read, watch, talk to, and learn more about your team and the NFL, right? I would say that I can only speak for me personally. My training in how to judge what is news and not, having gone to school for it, having worked at various papers and learned from a lot of important mentors and Pulitzer Prize winners and whatever the case may be. I think I am somebody who is conscientious through that learning and experience about how to approach the job on a daily basis, how to be a professional, and also with the work ethic to know that whether I'm doing good work on Monday or not, like if I do great work on Monday, I still have to wake up on Tuesday and do great work as well, right? What I did yesterday doesn't matter. That's something I've learned over the years as well. And Jay, like, listen, nowadays, there are so many outlets, just like we are here now on YouTube at the Talkin Ball with Pat Leonard YouTube channel, PL on NFL here. There are people, you can start up a YouTube channel, you can start an Instagram account, TikTok account, start talking Giants and try to build a following, right? And there's people who have built followings doing that who aren't at the facility every day, but they have a passion for the team. They have knowledge about the sport. Maybe they played it. Maybe they've just followed the NFL their whole lives. Maybe they've read all about it. Maybe they've memorized the history of the league. Maybe they know the Giants all-time roster by heart, right? Whatever the case may be. And everybody in the business, Jay, has a niche or creates a niche, I think is one thing I would say, is that, I think that like there are some people out there who create content and what they do is they analyze film best because they see the X's and O's of football extremely well. Then there are some people who are really good newsbreakers, right? But they're not great writers or great on TV. Then there's some people who are great on TV, but they struggle to put two sentences together, right? Then there's some people who are really good writers, but aren't good on television, or they're good on radio, whatever, So Jay, I think there's like room for everybody. That's how I view it. I would like to think that based on my experience, my conscientiousness, and my attention to detail, and hopefully my track record, like if you're following me and I break news or I tell you something's going to happen and it does, or I predict things correctly, or I'm consistently reliable and accurate, that over time that builds, more credibility than someone who's not doing some of those things. Right. So that's the hope there. But I think, nowadays you can, consuming everything of people that you believe are reliable, accurate, and trustworthy is a way often to kind of obtain a full picture of the team that you are following. So I hope that answers your question. If it doesn't, we'll talk more about it as you address it later. But thanks again for that support, the financial support, and for participating like that. It's great. All right. G-Man says, take a shot every time Brian Daboll or Joe Shane says smart, tough, dependable in a press conference. Oh, man. G-Man, I need a bottle of water next to me, too, to stay hydrated, or I need somebody to drive me to the hospital with that one. Vis4 Vegan says, that was earlier. He said that the numbers were down watching early on. Yeah, Vegan. So what happened there was, the NBA Finals is on as we're talking here, so I think the numbers early on were slower. But I know you Giants fans, I know you NFL fans. We're here on June 6th, and we have 100 people in here right now, and we're rolling, and it's only going to keep getting bigger. By the way, thank you to all you guys. I just looked at my YouTube analytics yesterday, and YouTube told me that we again set a record for views on this YouTube channel for the month of May. So everything just keeps going up, keeps rising. It's thanks to you guys and your engagement, your creativity, your passion. So we continue to hit new markers every month. And, I'm really grateful to you guys for that. We're rolling here. Kyler says, Pat getting a tan, working hard in that sun, buddy. And I promise you, Kyler, that's not like I haven't done the vacation yet. This tan is me going out to Giants practices a lot of the times and forgetting to put on sunscreen, right? And standing out there in the sun for 2 hours straight and not wearing a hat, right? So I have to learn my lesson by training camp or else I'll burn up. Let's see. By the way, it was so funny. Today, it was so hot and humid that some of the offensive linemen, they ended up staying out and doing extra work on the backfield. And a few of them like took their shirts off because their shirts were just, completely drenched, like they had dumped them in a tub and sticking to them, right? So a bunch of them were walking in and John Michael Schmitz was walking with him, and Schmitz did not have his shirt off. It was like 4 guys. He was the only one with his shirt off. And I said, "Oh, you're a holdout?" And he said, "I can't. I burn too easily." So that, to your point. D Kit says, "Pat, it's OTAs. Hard to tell anything about anyone. They are in shorts. Please don't do this." No, D, I'm not, trust me. I know it's early, but also let's be fair here, D Kit. If I'm going to sit here and tell you guys concerns about things when I see them, right? And we're going to get into all these details either way. Like, it would be disingenuous for me to not come on here and tell you that the number 6 overall pick, remember the draft, we're talking draft, a month ago. And here it is, the Giants trying to get a quarterback, and they end up with Malik Nabers instead. And it's like, well, okay, is this a good consolation prize? We know he's a good player, but they wanted a quarterback, whatever. And so I think it's really meaningful that Nabers had this kind of a practice. Now, you could flip it on its head and say, well, I'm kind of concerned about Cordell Flott in coverage, or you could say, why was he behind the safeties? And, obviously you could pick it apart as you try to gauge where the Giants roster is. But you're right. You're right. In fairness, they're not in pads. This is not real football yet. But D, I guess I promise you, if you were watching him on the field, because think about it. I know it sounds crazy, but I generally am watching Giants practices for a living, and so I see them every day. And so when something jumps out and looks unique, it's because it is, if that makes sense. So take that for what it's worth. Jay Fed says, football season officially kicked off tonight, CFL. Currently watching Montreal versus Winnipeg. Wonder if Nathan Rourke, the Giants, one of the Giants backups, is checking in, having played in the CFL prior to getting to the NFL. Yeah, Ryan says, I'm reporting what I saw. Exactly. D-Kit says it's touch football. Antonio says, what's up, Pat? What's up, Antonio? Good to see you. Bill says, how we doing, folks? Just logged out of work, chilling with all of you, sipping on a White Claw. All right. Got the Hill Rock going here. All right. Oh, looks like we got another one coming in here. Jay Farry says, if you dedicated your life to football, you went to college and have been an announcer, what is it like for Tom Brady and Jason Witten to leapfrog you and get those 10-figure jobs with no experience? Jay, I think, well, let's be honest. I mean, I'm not going to sit here and tell you I know as much football as Tom Brady. I mean, Tom Brady won 7 Super Bowls. So if he's eloquent and intelligent and thoughtful, right, then obviously that makes him more qualified than me, right? And, now Jason Witten, on the other hand, was not good at that. So he got his chance to because he was an NFL player, but he was not good at talking football. And therefore, really, I think I would question the statement that he leapfrogged, sports journalists, because Jay, that's the thing. I didn't play professional football, but I can see I see and observe what's happening on the field, I think, very well. I cultivate a lot of really good relationships. I'm able to convey what I see and know and hear I think in a way that I can present it to people where they can understand it, or it can create a conversation, or it can educate people who want to know more about the team or the sport. And so everybody has talents. So Brady obviously is the full package. I mean, they call him the GOAT for a reason. So, but I think, to your point, Jay, if somebody who was great at the sport is also really good at talking about it and explaining it, and they're engaging and entertaining, then of course that person 10 out of 10 times, that doesn't just go for like the NFL, that goes for anything. Of course, that person is more qualified to work in the media communication space than somebody who, me, I could be great at all those things, but if I didn't win 7 Super Bowls like Tom Brady, if I was equal in everything else, he's still the guy, right? So I sense a little bit of, I don't know. I don't know if you were trying to take a shot at me there or not. I appreciate, though, all of your support tonight and your questions, and I like engaging. So thanks. Keep it coming. All right. D-Kid says, fair point, Pat. I will retract my knee-jerk reaction. No, I mean, there's truth to what you said for sure, D-Kid. You're right that we have to keep perspective. There's no doubt about it. But yeah, I do think he deserves his flowers in context of what this was with Malik Nabers' practice for sure. D Kid also says, read your post about Evan Neal's somewhat non-participation these last few OTAs. Do you think he's on track to fully participate in preseason and compete for the right tackle spot? D Kid, this was concerning to me. And again, take it with a grain of salt. It's just observations about one day, one practice, but I'm telling you my perspective. So take it for what it's worth. Previous practices, Evan Neal had done much more than what we saw here today on Thursday, June 6th. The open practices we had seen previously, he had been in uniform, doing individual work, working with teammates during early drills, right? Like nothing crazy. And then he went over and did more individual stuff on his own or with Matt Nelson, another tackle, off to the side while the team stuff was happening, right? And today was different because Neal was, from the beginning, way away from the rest of the team. He was over near the bikes while the whole entire rest of the team was stretching and was like, even there were guys who ended up not practicing who were still in the stretch line. And then even the team broke down. Like, in other words, they got together in a circle, right? And said, let's have a good practice, whatever. And they're all standing on this one field. And about, 70 yards away, Evan Neal is there kind of under the canopy or under the awning of the building behind the bikes, just kind of standing there waiting to start pedaling. And something just didn't add up about it. I know he's coming off the surgically repaired left ankle, just not something I want to see. I do think, like everything I've understood all offseason that I've reported, and I know has since been confirmed, is that they were going to give him a chance at the right tackle job first, and that would be the priority. So you have to hope, cross your fingers at the moment, that what this is primarily and especially is just getting the guy healthy for his chance to do that. But I didn't like what I saw from just kind of the optics of it all. Something didn't add up. It's something to keep watching. So Josh Azudu was the one at right tackle with the first string offensive line again, which again, we've talked about, not something we want to see. Chris checks in with a $4.99 super chat. Thank you, Chris. He says, still concerned O-line will hold Jones and Nabers back this season. Yeah, Chris, I think, Illuminor and Runyon Jr. should help the line, but I agree with you. Like, you can't sit here and say, the O-line is fixed, right? You can't sit here and say that. It might end up being that way if they stay healthy, if the signings work out right away, if Evan Neal stays healthy and plays well, right? All those things. John Michael Schmidt's taking next step. That's a possibility, but the lack of depth is concerning, right? That's a primary concern. Now, Chris, to your point, I think if Nabers is as special as, like, in this kind of practice, to go back to my original point about him being a force multiplier, if a receiver is special enough, he can help mask some of those things. Like if Daniel Jones has some plays where Malik Nabers is getting free quickly and Daniel Jones could get rid of the ball, and you have this guy catching and running and making guys miss, and it's changing the way defenses need to attack them and all that, maybe you have a way to start protecting your linemen a little more because they don't have to block as long on passing downs, right? It's just one example of how a wide receiver can also help the line, right? Now, but you're absolutely right. From injuries to performance to anything else across the board, the offensive line absolutely has to improve. And Chris, to be honest with you, as much as I want to give them credit for trying to make improvements and the possibilities of what it could be, in the long run, they have not earned the full trust that it's going to be fixed until it happens. And I think that's what you're saying, and I agree. Tuto says, massive salutes and respect to Big Boss Pat, Dash, Faries, and all diehard Giants fans across the pond. Greetings from me and all my mates in Dublin, Ireland. Tudo is always one of the biggest supporters of the channel, along with guys like Joey and others here on the channel. Somebody who is constantly telling other Giants fans and recommending this channel to the community and to the NFL community, to the Giants community. And Tuto, I appreciate you always. Thank you so much. All right, let's see. Jay Faries again checks in with a $10 super chat. Thank you, Jay. Jay says, Pat, please name your top 2 favorite all-time songs and movies of all time. Thank you for answering all the questions so eloquently. Good question. One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest with Jack Nicholson is my favorite movie. I mean, I have other favorite movies, right? It's hard. It's usually you're throwing out like a list of 5. I love action movies. I love, comedies. I love like mysteries, detective shows, like, all that kind of stuff. Cuckoo's Nest, I love that. It's a classic. I think it's one of the best individual acting performances of all time by Nicholson in that movie. Similar to the Heath Ledger Joker, another excellent movie, Batman, Dark Knight Rises, like that, I am a huge fan of greatness and unique greatness. And so when I see it, I feel like it deserves to be appreciated. So that's my best answer on the movies. My favorite songs of all time. Specific songs. That's hard. Jay, I mean, things that are popping into my head right now. I would probably give you bands more than songs, but Illmatic, Nas, all-time album. Most Def, Black on Both Sides. The Grateful Dead, love the Grateful Dead. I appreciate, I pretty eclectic taste. I don't listen to a ton of country. I like hip hop. I like rock. I like some jam. I like music that has a good time. So I've started to get in, I don't put on country myself, but if someone puts it on at a party, I'll have a drink to that. That makes sense. All right. Thank you for all the support, guys. And Jay Faris, thank you for jumping in, supporting the channel so much, and bringing great questions here. Really appreciate you. All right. Let me find my way back into the queue here. Let's see. Bill says red gloves. LOL reminds me of the Julian Edelman story with Belichick. Jay Farry says, what's to drink tonight? This is Hill Rock bourbon, made in upstate New York, I believe. So not from down south, but a nice sweet sipper. D-Kit says, which 2024 picks do you believe will play more than 50% of the snaps? That's a really good question. Let's see. I would say more than 50%. 50% is a high number. I would say only Malik Nabers. And potentially, based on how things go in the secondary, Drew Phillips. You have to think that Nubin is going to get there, D-Kit. So I'm not saying he's not going to, but I know it's early, but Tyler Nubin has not played with the starters when I've been there. And Brian Daboll said that he's rotated Nubin and other guys through all 3 spots. So that means first, second, and third team. But he also said when I asked him if he has starting expectations for the second-round pick, a premium pick, Daboll basically put the onus on the player. In generalities, he said, we try to put them in certain positions to succeed, and then it's up to the player to do what they need to do. And so I didn't like hearing that, because what he didn't say was that he's playing well. He did say he's smart. He said he's doing the right stuff. He said he's over there even when it's not his turn to do a drill. He's kind of mimicking what guys are doing, trying to get extra reps in. And I like Nubin. He came in, seems like a high character guy, hard worker, all those things. But that's something to watch, D-Kit, just because the Giants could have used that second-round pick, needed to use that second-round pick on someone who can help them now, right? You want to be adding building blocks, but you need someone to help you. So whether it was drafting a slot corner in the second round who could help you, who was of higher pedigree than a Drew Phillips, whether it was getting an offensive lineman instead, whether it was drafting, why not just draft another wide receiver to help your offense, right? Not to mention quarterback position, though obviously they decided they didn't want to take any of the guys who were available there. So that's, I hope that answers your question. Antonio says, how active do you think the Giants will be this year on the waiver wire after cuts start to happen after training camp, considering we're picking 6th? Antonio, I think they'll be very active. I think this season will be similar to, not the same, but similar to the first year they came in when they didn't have a lot of cap space, but they knew that they had to constantly, reinforce weak positions and spots on their roster. So I think they'll be constantly scrounging for guys who are affordable and also can plug and play. And that would go with being on the waiver wire after camp as well, definitely. And obviously, right now, two positions that stick out like sore thumbs for them to add somebody would be running back and corner. I look at the running back list, and the guy who jumps out to me, this is just purely based on needing a downhill runner, needing some veteran leadership, needing better pedigree in the running back room, is Latavius Murray, who was on the Bills last year, I believe. So not reporting anything there yet, but just that's the kind of player to keep an eye on, and now he's a free agent. That's not a waiver wire thing. But there are positions on this Giants team across, not across the board, but generally across the roster. Like, they're going to need to continue to look everywhere for improvements. Antonio said, what are you looking forward to during mandatory minicamp next week? And what are differences between minicamp and OTAs? Minicamp ramps up. They're allowed to do much more closer to real football on the field. So that's the primary difference, Antonio. It's mandatory. So if guys don't show up, they can be fined. So you expect attendance. Jordan Phillips was there, by the way, today. We hadn't seen him at the previous two open OTAs. So it's really, it's a dress rehearsal for training camp, right? It's the way for Brian Daboll or whatever head coach to try to send the team off with, here's the way we want it to look. Here's what we have as far as expectations for you. Here's what our program's really going to look more like come training camp, right? And get them in the mode of expectations of how they're going to need to conduct themselves, how they're going to need to practice, and setting the tone for when they come in late July. What I'm looking forward to most is whether Daniel Jones is going to do 11 on 11. I want to see, it was really kind of a ballooned, injured or rehabbed or resting group at this practice we saw at OTA number 9. So I think team health, considering their injury history and their issues year in and year out in this organization, I think that's something to continue to monitor. As well as, Antonio, how hard do they go? How much do they do? Does Daboll continue to show urgency? Is there a ton of teamwork? Is it an aggressive and, nasty practice, right? Is it ultra competitive? Are you seeing the urgency continually of a team with a coach and potentially GM on the hot seat? Those types of things. D-Kid says, can you glean anything in 11 on 11? How are we going to play at all on defense? Are they showing both man and zone concepts? Did you get to see Phillips compete? They're showing both man and zone concepts in general, D-Kit. It boils down to trying to keep the ball in front of their secondary and rushing for. You're seeing different switches back from man to zone. I will say this, D-Kit, Nabers against zone is so good at finding the gaps inside, right? They're moving him around. He's running a lot out of the slot. Jalen Hyatt actually talked about doing, continuing to work at doing on the outside. Obviously, Hyatt played a lot of slot in college too. Nabers is moving around, but definitely works a lot out of the right slot. And he's really good at finding those zone areas, those gaps in there. And his catch and run when he does that is second to none. Phillips, seen him a little bit competing, not as much as I would like as far as like in individual, like one-on-one battles. Hopefully get to see, that in, mini camp and then obviously in training camp, but more like true one-on-one battles with receivers isolated that we can really get better read on his talent as a cover guy in the NFL early on, because we know he can tackle and he's tough, but obviously we need him. The Giants need him to be really solid in coverage in order to potentially, hopefully address, their slot corner situation. All right, let's see. Who do we got next? I think we have some more super chats in the queue. Jay Farry says, so if you were a general manager today, what Giants players that Shane has drafted would you be interested in signing as tier 1 free agents? Tier 1 free agents? Well, Jay, I think my answer to that, just answering the question you just asked me, what Giants players that Joe Shane has drafted would you be interested in signing as a tier 1 free agent? My answer would be none of them. Nabers looks like, though, that he could be that kind of guy. So you're saying tier 1 free agent in the NFL. So I would say if Nabers produces the way it looks like he could, then it would be him, but I wouldn't choose anybody else in that category at the moment. JJ, what's up? He says, greetings, Pat. Nabers and Hyatt could be solid. Hyatt told us that he gained a little bit of weight. His arms do look bigger. He knows that he has to fortify his body for the long year. D-Kit says, and thanks, D-Kit, again for the support. Thank you, JJ. J-Jans. D-Kit says, let me put it as kindly as I can. If the 47th pick of a safety doesn't get the majority of snaps, this will be a major problem. Can't happen. Bad. Agree. I don't like what I see there. Jay Farries again. Jay Farries, I can't thank you enough. He says, I could see a situation where Daniel Jones gets another contract extension. It sounds nuts, but we are likely in quarterback hell. What do you think is the answer? None of the NFC East quarterbacks are great. Yeah, Jay, I think the most common answer you get from people in the league about where the Giants go from here at quarterback is just go right back to the draft, especially, and this is something I wrote about in the New York Daily News this week, with top wide receivers going for $35 million a year with Justin Jefferson, and then eventually the market will catch up to there, even if it doesn't right now. Because most of the rest of the receivers are just under 30 or right around 30. So right now you have Malik Nabers, who could be your number 1 wide receiver, right? Like true number 1 star receiver on a rookie cost control deal. So if you can then draft a quarterback, now obviously, that means you have Daniel Jones paid, you're paying him $40 million a year. So it helps to have the receiver on the cost control. Now you have that for 3 years before Malik Nabers is eligible for that for an extension, right? So if you can draft a rookie quarterback next year, you have 2 years with your quarterback and your receiver, your top receiver, on cost control rookie contracts. And if you hit on that quarterback and you hit on Nabers, that's how you turn around a team. So, it's not just the 2 players, but that goes a long way. So, I mean, listen, if Daniel Jones stays healthy, plays well, they go back to the playoffs this year, he stays on this contract, they keep winning, and he earns a 3rd contract from the Giants, hey, everyone will go home happy, right? If that's the ultimate result and he turns into that player and this turns into that kind of program, great. When you say none of the NFC East quarterbacks are great, I would say Jaden Daniels, we don't know yet, right? Number 2 pick, we don't know yet. Let's see. So unknown commodity there. Obviously, you expect rookies to have growing pains, though. So we'll see. After that, Jalen Hurts, question marks, has played at an elite level, has played at head scratching, what the heck am I watching levels. But definitely a dynamic threat who is not easy to defend. If he can use his legs along with running that offense capably in the passing game and not being too predictable like they became late last year. So he could go either way. And then Dak Prescott, we know he doesn't get it done in the playoffs, but has been extremely productive in the regular season and obviously has toasted and torched the Giants. So right now, if they were to go the free agent route next year, Dak is the name who keeps coming up. But is that really your answer, right, to where the Giants want to be? Do they want to get involved in paying a guy like Dak what he would be commanding? Yes, you have Nabers on that rookie contract for 2 more years, but is that what you're trying to get involved in versus the draft? I think you're still looking at building and going towards the draft, if that's what your need is at quarterback, right? But yeah, like I said, bearded Daniel Jones, if he earns a 3rd contract, then that means everything's going right in Giants land. Getting back into the queue, Ryan likes the Celtics in the finals. Brett says, hey, Pat, any injury concerns since the start of OTAs? How's Gunnar Olszewski? Olszewski, their punt returner and their best returner on the team. hurt his either left foot or ankle. He was in a boot today. We saw him at the late end of practice. Like, he wasn't practicing. Brian Daboll said he should be ready for training camp. He's not going to practice Friday or at mandatory mini camp. They need, you look at this roster, Isaiah McKenzie has been on the side. There's other guys working in the punt return realm, but Gunner is the most reliable fielder, right, of catching the punts and making sure the Giants have possession. So wide receiver position, that's not a concern. Return game, big concern to me, something you need fixed. While we're talking about special teams, a couple things. Like I said, I'll be posting a video of the Giants practicing their kick returns. So keep in mind, Gunner wasn't out there on the field, but today, when they did kick returns, okay, they were lining up 2 returners in the back, because obviously teams now have the choice of doing 2 guys back there or 1, right, with these new rules. And today the lineup was, the first 2 up was Devin Singletary and Dante Miller, the running backs. The second 2 up were Tyrone Tracy Jr., the running back, and Darius Slayton. And the third 2 were Wan'Dale Robinson and Ayir Asante. So that was what the back end of the kick return looked like as they were practicing it here in this one OTA practice. Other injury concerns, Isaiah Simmons really has been on the side the whole time we've seen in the spring. Daniel Bellinger was on the side today as well. Didn't do much. Tyree Jackson, the tight end, has something on his left arm and hasn't been practicing. He hurt that early, I think, in the first open OTA that we saw, that one inside. I saw him getting checked out that day, and he hasn't practiced since, to my knowledge. Brian Burns was not at this practice, though. The Giants did not say it was related to anything specific or concerning. Obviously, Darren Waller wasn't there. Graham Gano wasn't there, but, Gano goes in and out. Aaron Robinson's been on the side the whole time. Javarius Owens was on the side in this one. Benton Whitley, the outside linebackers, on the side. Evan Neal and Matt Nelson, the tackles, those are guys I'm really looking at. Neal is like my biggest concern right now, Brett, from a standpoint of what's going on. Why was he backed off? Things like that. And then, like I mentioned, Micah McFadden was a new guy on the side there, along with Isaiah Simmons, an inside linebacker. Antonio says, how do you think Isaiah Simmons' role changes with the new defensive coordinator change from Wink to Bowen? Interesting to see, Antonio, especially because I know everyone's talking about how interested and excited they are about how they're going to use him. But are we not overlooking that Martindale got the best football out of Isaiah Simmons last year as a complementary piece, as a guy who blitzed well, as a guy who guarded running backs and tight ends on third down, especially well against running backs on third downs in man-to-man coverage, that he used his athleticism, that he didn't play him every down, but he used him in sparing, specific game plan roles that highlighted his strengths and protected his weaknesses. Like, I thought Martindale and Simmons did a great job. In fact, I got to go find the quote, but I talked to Simmons about this late last season. He was effusively praising how excited he was about matching up with Martindale because of how well he used him and unlocked what talent he has. This is a first-round top 10 talent that the Arizona Cardinals really couldn't figure out, and he wasn't a fit. And, there was frustration there on both ends. And so, to me, you have to try to replicate how Martindale used him, which is as a guy who can do a little bit of everything around the secondary and the linebacker core and blitzing, and you have to keep it unpredictable and unleash his skill set, right? So that's what I think, Antonio. I think it would be a mistake to pigeonhole him into something specific. I think it would be a mistake to play him deep, right? I think what you have to do is keep him down in the box, around the play, around the ball. And I think you need to use him that way. What I know about Shane Bowen's defense, he does one thing he does similar to Martindale is, faking blitzes from one area and dropping in coverage, and then, dummy blitzes, and then sending somebody else off the edge, or you fake off the edge and you send somebody up the interior. I think that, if I could tell you based on what I know about how he runs his defense and about what Simmons does well, that is something I think I would look for specifically. I know that doesn't answer about his, exact position, but that's what I see. All right. Jay Farry says, what is your opinion of all the Giants fans talking smack about Daniel Jones's cap hit? He was 26 and we went to the playoffs. They weren't moving off of him. Giants are picky at quarterback. Is this nonsense? Well, Jay, I think it's more about the frustration of feeling like in that moment that the Giants were negotiating against themselves in many ways, in the sense that Daniel Jones's market on the open market, the opinion of him around the league was not as high as what the Giants had of him internally. And so they ultimately, Jay, the Giants would have preferred to sign him, to franchise tag him and sign Saquon Barkley. And then they ended up flipping it and doing the opposite. You're right, though, that in that moment, he had played his way into deserving something, right? Into deserving some sort of confidence. Then again, the way that the offense operated and that Daboll coached the offense and what Daniel Jones did and didn't do that season also reinforced where his limitations were, and the fact that the Giants were still not an offensive-led team, right? And so Daniel Jones is being paid like a guy who can carry a team, but he still has not done that, right? And we all know that not only was that offense not great in the playoff year a couple years ago, even though Daniel had great games against the Colts and the Vikings there at the end and in the playoffs, but that the offense, when it was making plays, was largely a Saquon-led offense. There were a couple games where Daniel stepped up, including that Green Bay game. But even in that Green Bay game in London, Saquon made 2 explosive plays that really changed field position and helped change the game, right? So I hope that answers the question. But you make a fair point as well with where the Giants are and how they feel like we had money and we had a high pick invested in a guy who took us to the playoffs, right? But that doesn't mean you need to double down on something, especially when Joe Shane and Brian Daboll did come in here believing Daniel Jones was limited to a point and that they were going to end up moving on at some point, but ended up winning in year 1 and everything changed. Bill says, Hill Rock, nice. I went to Palm Springs recently and they had 3 bottles of Blanton's, not overly marked up, so I grabbed one. Oh, Bill, boy, do I love a bottle of Blanton's. That's my favorite drink. That's one of my favorite drinks. Probably my favorite. Antonio says, do you think the Giants add a veteran corner between now and the start of the season, or are they banking on a lot of these guys to develop, like Flott, Andrew Phillips, etc.? I think they do try to scour for some corner help on the outside, but they're not going to be a big spender. So that makes it difficult. But that's definitely a position to keep an eye on. Antonio says, do you still expect Waller to retire? Yes, but he hasn't said anything official. Bill Hartnett says, good question, Jay Farries. Pat seems like he has level-headed takes. Maybe they want the reporter to be a cheerleader, but that's not his job. Jay says, Bill, I really like how he teaches what he does. Thank you, Jay. Thank you, Bill. Really appreciate that. Antonio says, Pat, what are your thoughts on Theo Johnson up to this point? I think as a receiver, he can contribute. I wouldn't expect anything explosive. I'm excited most about him as a blocker, which we haven't seen enough of, obviously, because it hasn't been full tilt in pads. But we should see that, as we go here into the offseason, mandatory minicamp, training camp. Hirsch, what's good? Good to see you. Antonio says, would you expect Theo or Daniel Bellinger to be the starter if and when Waller retires? Personally, I think it's going to be a continued competition and mix and match. I think that, Chris Manhertz and Jack Stoll, guys who can block or are veterans who could prove like reliable, or guys who I think you're going to see on the field. Lawrence Cager had a really good practice today. So that's something to keep an eye on, especially from a receiving end as a tight end. And then Theo Johnson, I think as a blocker and as a rookie investment, as a 4th round pick. Bellinger, I think, has an uphill battle here, to be honest with you. I know he's their draft pick, but, with some veteran guys, like this is one thing. Like I heard somebody said, it was Mike Clay, who I really like Mike's work. And I was listening to him on Jordan's podcast and I heard him call Daniel Bellinger like really a success story as far as like a 4th round pick goes. And I would dispute that in the sense that I know that he's made contributions and I like Bellinger a lot. He's a good kid, works hard, good person, all that. But he's committed a lot of costly penalties. I mean, we've seen plenty of holding penalties, plays, infractions by Bellinger that have called plays back. He has really struggled as a blocker. And that's something I think that should not be overlooked. Like I think that needs to be pointed out. And frankly, when it comes down to the position battle of tight end, I think if Theo Johnson and Stoll and Manhurts, like if these guys can block capably without committing penalties, that automatically puts them ahead of Daniel Bellinger on the tight end depth chart, in my opinion, because it's something that he has shown that he can't do at the NFL level. And that's not me picking on him. That's me just being honest about the tight end depth chart that you're talking about and asking me about. All right, let's see. Yeah. So, by the way, to go back to answer your question, who was it, Antonio? Someone was asking about minicamp. So, minicamp is technically part of phase 3. So, phase 3 is no live contact permitted, but 7-on-7, 9-on-7, and 11-on-11 drills are permitted. So that includes the mandatory minicamp for veteran players, which occurs during phase 3 of the offseason program. So hopefully that sufficiently answers your question. Dan says, hey, Pat, do you think Waller money would be spent on vet corner D-line or saved for in-season and 2025? I think based on where this front office and coach are, I think it would be spent. But then again, Dan, the one thing is, it's one thing to want to go sign a better player and spend money. It's another thing for players out there to feel like the Giants are a team they want to sign with at this point, based on what the outlook is for the season. But they will have some extra funds. So I think you're not going to spend it all, but you are going to have more to work with if Waller retires. For show, KB says, I talked to Hyatt. I went to high school with him. He's extremely confident and believes this team is different from last year by a long shot. Breakout year incoming. Yeah, he said today that he thinks it's a playoff team. We will see if that's true. Bold statement from the young man, but we will see. All right. Jay Farries checks in again with a $10 super chat. Says, are we at the point where we feel like the media and fans just bring this team down? What is your prediction for this year? The best Giants season start with a week 1 win and low expectations. Jay, that last part you said is fair. No, listen, I think there are probably people inside the Giants who feel like the media brings them down. But the bottom line is, if they win games, they get praised. And if they lose games, they get critiqued and criticized. And that's really any NFL team, not just the Giants. So no, people like me don't have an effect on whether the team wins or loses. My prediction for this year, right now, based on the schedule that I put in the Daily News, was 4-13. I know that's not something Giants fans want to hear. I do not share Jalen Hyatt's optimism. I think their schedule is not easy. I think that there's a lot that has changed that needs to come together quickly. The quarterback position is unsettled, could become a competition. The offensive line is kind of cross your fingers and hope it improves. The running back room doesn't look great. The secondary looks weak and young. So a lot of reasons why. You are right, though, Jay. You make a really good point, and this is something that I've talked about before on here, but it bears repeating. Low expectations plus a week 1 win for sure, right? Those are the best seasons, how they start. I agree with that. But especially under Brian Daboll and Joe Schoen here, their first 2 seasons, what did we see? The first year, what happened in week 1? An inspirational win, going for that 2-point conversion, right? Instead of kicking the extra point to tie the game, all those things. They win in Tennessee. They start 6-1. And even though they really didn't finish strong going down the stretch of that season, they make the playoffs. They win a playoff game, right? They get blown out in Philadelphia, but what they did in week 1 spurred enough momentum for them to have what you would call that season, based on expectations, of success. The next year, what happens? They have a disastrous week 1 game and they never recover, right? They never recover. And they slip and slide and they finish 6-11. And I think the best way to put it would be, Joe Schoen constantly, when he talks about last season, he constantly references Andrew Thomas's injury in that game, the blocked field goal, how everything unraveled, injuries, this and that. I mean, one game should not define your year either way, right? But the reality is for the Giants the last 2 years, it has. So I think you make a really good point. And that's why Minnesota is obviously a beatable opponent. Of course, they're not like projected to be a top team in the league, but they have some talent, right? They have talent on both sides of the ball. They have good coaches, Kevin O'Connell, Brian Flores, and they're the Giants' week 1 opponent. So that game, Washington in week 2, the Giants need to go at least 1-1 in those games, if not 2-0 based on how their schedule looks. So how they start, most definitely, I agree with you, Jay, is going to go a long way to tell us how the season is going to go. Antonio says, any details you have noticed on how Michael Gabriel has been working with the special teams unit? I notice he's got a big voice when he speaks. You hear him. Also, something to point out: Isaiah Hodgins, who I was confused that he resigned in the first place. Isaiah Hodgins was working today as a gunner on punt coverage. That's, I believe, a first for me for what I've seen. So, not sure that's an encouraging sign for Isaiah Hodgins, but obviously the more you can do. And Antonio, I would say, all the way back to rookie minicamp, I would say I've seen a lot of attention to detail on the new kickoff rule. They've been doing a lot of that setup, kind of repping it, making sure guys are getting it in, that it's a reminder to them how it goes, how it works, and working on how they want to attack it. So that's been interesting. And like I said, a lot of what I've seen from them has been 2 returners in the back, not 1. Brett says, are my hopes too high for Elijah Chapman on the defensive line? I think any hopes for an undrafted rookie often are too high, no offense, because, even if they contribute well, it's probably going to be in a supporting role and not in a role that is game changing consistently, if at all. But there is certainly, to your point, Brett, there's a huge opportunity there. Like today, there was one rep. I saw DJ Davidson got some opportunities on the interior, was out there with the first team to start next to Dexter Lawrence. And in one rep against the second team offensive line, and this isn't full contact, full pads, but they're blocking each other, right? And they're in some battles in the interior. I mean, Aaron Stinney put DJ Davidson almost through the ground. I mean, he literally like buried him down on his back on the ground, like nearly 6 feet under. I mean, it was like, oh boy, that's a loss right there. That's a win and a loss. And so, there's no confidence right now of a sure thing next to Dexter Lawrence on the interior. So Chapman has as good of a chance as anybody. Bill says Daboll needs a big Dom. Once he was banned from the field, Sirianni crumbled. Well, Jerry Mead with the Giants, the guy you always see on camera standing pretty close to Daboll, but not as physically imposing as Big Dom, but who is? OG, what's good? Good to see you. OG Knockout. Jay says, Jay asked me, can I throw a football? Oh, yeah. No doubt. Yeah, I've played just about everything. I didn't play organized football when I was younger, but, I play backyard pickup with the best of them. Let's see. Big Dash, salute to you, Pat. What's up, Big Dash? Good to see you. D-Kid says, Pat, what was the last piece you wrote that after it was published, you were like, oh, maybe I should have thought that through a little bit more? I don't, you know what, D-Kid? Depending on who your boss is in my business, sometimes there are times like I've worked for people in the past who, they're talking to you after a practice and they say, oh, what happened today? And you say, here's what I heard, this and that, here's what I saw, this and that. And they say, okay, I want you to give me whatever strong opinion you have about that. I want you to give it today. And then you say, well, I don't really know if I have a strong opinion on it, or I don't know if now's the right time for that, or this and that. And your editor says, well, I'm your boss. You need to do it. So figure it out and do it. Like if something like that happens, that's where you get into a position where you're like, oh, I rushed something, or maybe I should have let that breathe, or whatever the case is. I would say, I'm not under pressure right now in my career with my boss, and I'm fortunate enough with the people I work with. I'm not under pressure ever right now to write something where I only write something or report something when I'm comfortable with it and I don't rush it. Though I've told this story before, D-Kit, but this isn't like a story I wrote, but okay. So you guys will like this story. I might have told this before, but I think you'll like it anyway. It's a good instruction of how the business goes. So back during the hiring cycle of Brian Daboll and Joe Schoen, I also at that time was working the whole league hiring circuit and as our NFL columnist as well, which I do every year. And I was really, kind of surging as a newsbreaker and competing in that market and being involved in everything and on top of everything. And at the time, there were two primary stories I was chasing down. One was I had gotten a tip that Sean Payton might be stepping down as the Saints head coach. And I knew it definitively from one trusted source, but I was trying to confirm it with another two or, one, a second, a third. I also, frankly, felt like it was such a serious thing about such a big person in the game that I wanted to confirm it with Payton himself before reporting it. I felt like that was only fair. So I was trying to run that down. And then the second thing was I had heard from a trusted source that Joe Schoen was telling people during his interview process that Brian Daboll was somebody he wanted, but that he thought that he was going to take the Dolphins job and was not going to be the Giants coach. So I was running both of these things down and working the phones, working the sources and all that kind of stuff. I ended up in situations with both stories where I had good information on it and I was trying to do more, but I was also under pressure to try to be first, right? So with Sean, so I made two different decisions. Sean Payton, wouldn't answer, then declined to say anything. And I didn't end up reporting it because I felt like it just needed to be confirmed with him first. And then on the Daboll Schoen story end, I ended up confirming with a second source that Daboll was emerging as one of the favorites for the Dolphins job. Not that he was going to be hired, but that he was one of the leading contenders. So the decisions I made on both was I didn't report the Payton one. I was continuing to wait on Payton trying to confirm that for me, even though I had a trusted person telling me it was happening. And on the other side, having two sources on this Daboll thing, I didn't say the Dolphins were going to hire him, but I reported that he was emerging as a leading candidate for the Dolphins vacancy. And it turned out I made the wrong decision on both ends. Not that at the time I reported that information on both sides, I had good information on both stories. But it turned out the right thing to do with Payton was when Payton was stalling me and not answering or telling me no comment, the right thing to do was just to go with it. Because a week later, Ian Rappaport puts out that Sean Payton's stepping down and I don't break the story, right? Even though I was just trying to do things the right way. So that was frustrating. And then I reported Daboll was emerging as the favorite for the Dolphins job when it turned out over the following 24 hours, the Dolphins were going in a different direction. The Giants were starting to wind down. Brian Flores was involved, but it turned out Daboll was the guy, right? And so that was probably the last time where I was frustrated that I felt like I had done a lot of good work and research and gotten to some good information. And it just turned out that in the long run, those decisions, if I had just flipped them, and it wasn't like I rushed that and didn't rush it, whatever. Like it was just, I should have broken the Payton news and continued to sit on the Daboll thing to see if it would clear up first, right? If that makes sense. And by the way, the trolling I got for that Daboll report, oh my goodness. I mean, terrible, terrible. When all you're doing is reporting something that really is true on Tuesday and not Wednesday, if that makes sense. Hope that answers your question. All right, let's see. Big Dash says, hit the like button, folks. It's free. Yes, thank you, Big Dash. Brett says, Pat, I need a favor. I need a montage of every hit DJ has taken since he came into the league. People would have a bit more respect. He got up every time. That's fair, Brett, and no one will ever and should ever question Daniel's toughness. That's for sure. Terry says, what's up, Pat? What is the weekly O-line and Evan Neal status? Neal on the side doing very little, not even stretching or breaking down with the team before practice. Didn't like seeing that. Was clearly backed off with that surgically repaired left ankle compared to previous practices that we've seen in the spring so far, Terry. So he was on the bike and then watching drills up close, not participating. Let me see. And then I can give you our O-line alignment. So the first team O-line was Andrew Thomas, left tackle, Illuminor, left guard, John Michael Schmidt, center, John Runyon Jr., right guard, Josh Azudu, right tackle. Second team was Josh Miles, left tackle, Jake Kubas, left guard, Jimmy Morrissey, center. He did have one bad snap over Drew Lock's head today. Aaron Stinney, right guard. And then right tackle was sometimes Josh Azudu and sometimes Yadni Kajust. And then the third team O-line was Josh Miles staying at left tackle. So remember, Matt Nelson's on the side as well. Marcus McKeithen, left guard. Austin Schlottman, center. Jalen Mayfield, right guard. And Marcellus Johnson, right tackle. Depth of concern. Neil a concern. You hope by the time training camp comes, he's on the field. I will tell you, we talked to John Runyon Jr., and to summarize that O-line update or to round it out, I did ask John Runyon Jr. directly about settling in at right guard because you guys, we've talked about this here before, he said when he signed here that he prefers the left, right? So I said, how do you feel about settling in on the right? I think when you came in, you said you like the left side. We know you can play both. How do you feel about it? And he said, yeah, my whole career didn't matter where I played. Early on in my career, I played mainly left. And towards the end, second half, moved over to the right. He said, it feels natural for me now. Kind of when I moved over there about 2 years ago, kind of felt like a fish out of water, but it's kind of my home now and I feel comfortable there. Been taking reps there pretty much this whole time. And day by day, just gets more comfortable in sets and footwork and everything has been flowing. He did say that he, just like any lineman, prefers staying in one spot versus moving around. Obviously, sometimes that's not a luxury you have, but I think it was very clear that as a veteran and a guy who's settling in there and really hasn't moved, that, if he's playing there, he'd like to play there, right? Stay at right guard. Another thing, I thought this was an interesting answer. Runyon was asked about playing on the right side, being a veteran kind of mentor, somebody to lean on, like as an additional responsibility with John Michael Schmitz and Evan Neal. And, he talked about John Michael Schmitz a little bit, praised him. He's on top of his stuff. His answer about Evan Neal was this. He goes, Evan, I don't know what Evan is dealing with, but he hasn't been in there any of the team periods. He's been there in the walkthrough. I think he's been taking his time getting his body right, understanding our scheme. When we are in there in walkthroughs together, he's been on top of his stuff. He's been helping me out too, because this is still a new scheme, something I've never done before. He's helping me. He's in my ear about it too. Those are two young guys, but they're really mature for their age, and I'm really impressed with them so far. I would say also that hoping to talk to Evan Neal before the spring is up. I think it would be unusual if we did not. All right, let's check it out. Looks like we got another one in from Jay Faries. Says, what would you redo in your career if you could do it all over again? No disrespect intended at all. Jay, good question. Another good question. And thank you for all of your support, man, tonight. Really appreciate that. So, Jay, I think I honestly, and I'm not like tooting my horn or patting myself on the back or whatever. I don't have a lot of regrets, which I'm very grateful for in my life to date. I would say I would just start this earlier. Like when I was in college, start a channel. Like if I had started a YouTube channel in college talking NFL. And so now here in 2024, I'm 20 years in to my YouTube channel instead of 2 years in or whatever it is. That's really the only thing. Because otherwise I feel like I've tried to go about it the right way and I'm proud of what I've done. From moving to New York and going to the Daily News to staying at the Daily News. And, even from getting out of college is, like getting out of college and kind of having to like grind from the bottom up. Like you graduate from college and you think, oh, like, I'm going to get this huge job and I worked my way there and it's time for me to shine now. And then you realize that no, like you got to prove yourself every day. Like that was the best lesson I got out of college was I nearly got a job at Sports Illustrated right out of college. I was one of two people as a finalist for a high school job. Like they were starting to cover high schools in Sports Illustrated at the time and do like blurbs. And it was me and another guy, and the other guy got the gig. And, instead of taking another job, I had another offer at the Idaho State Journal, I think it was, in Pocatello, Idaho, for 21.5 grand. And I turned it down because I didn't, at the time, I didn't want to move out there. I'd just been in the Midwest for 4 years. I kind of wanted to come back East. And I wasn't sure. I knew I loved sports writing and sports, but did I want to go cover Idaho State football? I don't know. I felt like a fish out of water if I took that. I wasn't sure what living on 21.5 was going to look like at the time. And I was young, and I ended up going to Philadelphia and working at Temple University for 2 years in academic support for student athletes. And then after 2 years there, kind of going back into it, grinding, starting from the bottom at the Philadelphia Inquirer, answering phones and taking high school scores, and then working as a freelancer covering local high schools. And eventually they put me on some college practices and games, some NBA, NHL, MLB, like Phillies, Sixers, Flyers, Eagles, like practices, games, whatever it was. And you end up cutting your teeth and building from there. Mike checks in with a super chat. Thank you, Mike. He says, thanks for your Giants coverage. The Neighbors hype made my day. You got it. And no, Neighbors was a lot of fun to watch, though I will say, like the Daniel Jones beard, like we haven't talked enough about that tonight. I mean, I love this like anti-hero, alter ego, Daniel Jones, like, revenge villain beard that he's got going. Like, it cracks me up as far as like, I think it's great. Like it's great theater, that he comes out in his first press conference and he's kind of got a chip on his shoulder. And then next thing you know, we see him at practice like 2 weeks later, and he's got a full beard and he's scruffy and he just looks like a guy who's got nothing to lose. I love it. I love it. All right, let's see. Brandon says, hi, Pat, love your stuff. I'm 45 and I became a Giants fan in 85 when they were kicking ass. I love the linebacker core this year. What do you think? Well, inside linebacker, I think could be a concern. Like Bobby Okereke is a great player. Micah McFadden is a good player, but has, down the stretch last year, missing too many tackles, needs to fix that. So other than Bobby, I think there's some concern there. Obviously, Isaiah Simmons can help out as well. Carter Coughlin is getting a shot, so we'll see what Carter can do with that. Love Carter as a competitor. He's been waiting for a chance on defense, so we'll see if he can shine in that role as well. He's obviously been a core special teamer for them. And then I think at pass rusher too, if you're grouping like those guys as outside linebackers, right, edge rushers, a lot of potential with Brian Burns, Kayvon Thibodeau, Azeez Ojulari leading that group, no doubt. And of course, they have a ton invested in Burns, Lawrence, Thibodeau, even Azeez, a second-round pick, right? So they need that to be the strength of their team if they're going to succeed. There's no question about it. Bill says, next press conference, you have to say, Daniel, are you keeping the beard? The fans are 100% in love with it. Oh, there is no question about it that the next time I see Daniel Jones, doesn't have to be a press conference. The next time I see Daniel Jones and I have an opportunity to speak to him and get his response face to face, I will be asking him about the beard and nothing else. There's no doubt. Let's see. Jay Farry says, glad you showed up, Tudo. I am out of money. Jay, I'm really grateful, man. You have brought it tonight, brought it during this chat. If you guys are listening on the Believe Network, on Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts, because obviously we repurpose these and put them on the audio podcast as well. So we do these as live chats on the YouTube channel, which the handle is @PL on NFL. That's also my handle on Instagram, TikTok, and Threads. On X, I'm P Leonard NYDN. And of course, you can find me on the New York Daily News website, nydailynews.com/sports. And of course, this podcast is available wherever you get them. So like I said, Apple, Spotify being two of the primaries, but wherever you listen to a pod, you can get it through the Believe Network. But if you're listening and not watching, we have a great system right now where we record these live, and you can see all the comments pop up. And so you can read the fan and participants' comments as I answer them. So I post them while I'm answering and we talk about them. I give likes to the people who are bringing it and bringing the best insight, and try to acknowledge everybody who is acknowledging and supporting me. And so it's a really fun, interactive way to do this. If you're new to this channel as well, for those of you returning who have been, subscribers already, you know this, but we have the Talkin Ball with Pat Leonard podcast as well, where I have special guests on. If you didn't catch it already, I just did one with Leonard Marshall recently. Fantastic interview, about 50 minutes. I think it's very much worth your time going into this 100th season with the Giants. A lot of extra content from player and coach interviews on the channel as well on YouTube. And my unique analysis and insight. Going to start doing different series on YouTube Shorts around the beat, describing what it's like covering the Giants and being on the road and all those types of things. I think you'll enjoy. There's going to be merch coming for Talkin Ball. I know I told you it would be up by the end of May. I don't have it done yet, but I promise you'll have it. Hopefully see you guys out at training camp wearing some Talkin Ball stuff. By the way, we had the Giants. Okay. I roll into practice at Giants practice here on Thursday, June 6th. And when I roll into Giants practice, what music are they playing? They're playing the theme song for the Talkin Ball with Pat Leonard podcast, How We Do, by The Game. So the Giants were playing that as we walked into practice. And I looked at one of the Giants PR guys, Dion Dargan, and I said, Talkin Ball reference here. The Giants appreciate Talkin Ball. Let's go. So felt like a special day, with the Giants acknowledging the podcast, obviously. I mean, they probably weren't intentionally doing that, but that's how I'm going to take it. So very funny. Who we got here? Looks like, here we go. Jay Ferry says, who are some of the content creators you have tons of respect for? No bullshit, real journalist, respect. Let's see. I mean, Authentic is my man. Authentic is somebody I think who puts in the time, knows his stuff, helps keep fans engaged, has really good insight, great graphics, great production quality, is somebody who, like I said, you have people like Big Dash. There's a lot of people who jump into the chat who really just produce great Giants content, great NFL content, and are dedicated to this team, dedicated to not only, like, you guys don't just love the Giants and love the NFL, but you love sharing your knowledge and insight and being a part of a community that is talking about it and building something together. And so, I mentioned Dash there. I mentioned Authentic. Those are two guys I really respect. But there's a lot of content creators out there who are working it and who are doing great work. But those are two who jump out to me just when you ask me that question. Okay, I have to get into the chat here. If you're waiting on me to get to your comments, all right, I'll try to get down to it. Let's see. Brett says Illuminor needs to be right tackle ASAP. He hasn't been yet, but we will see. Let's see. Jay Farry says, Tuto, living near the water in San Diego gets expensive, mate. I eat ramen and buy super chats. It's hard. You know what's funny, Jay Farry's? San Diego is one of the only major U.S. cities I feel like I haven't been to. And I hear it's beautiful. I know it's beautiful. I have to get there. But I never covered the NFL when the Chargers were in San Diego. I never covered a game in San Diego with the Chargers there. So I never, and like when I covered hockey, there wasn't a hockey team there. Right. So I just never ended up there. I guess, San Diego and San Antonio, as far as you think of like big teams that have, or towns or cities that have big pro sports teams. Those are two I haven't been to. Really been well traveled covering these pro sports, but those are two. So I need to get there. Kyler says, I read Jones was 5 of 6 in the end zone for TDs. Jones knows this is it for his Giants career, maybe NFL career. So why does everyone talk so bad about him? And is he fired up for once? Well, Kyler, no. I mean, you say when he looks good, you say when he doesn't. I mean, that was in a red zone period where they were basically lined up at the 10. It was 7-on-7. There were 2 plays where Daniel Jones had to hold the ball forever because guys weren't open. So you could call them like coverage sacks, right? There was no offensive or defensive line. So there were some plays where the guys weren't open, but there were some plays where the guys did get open. So Wan'Dale Robinson, Jalen Hyatt, Malik Nabers all caught them. So calling those touchdowns just in a tweet is disingenuous to you guys, the fans, because if you were standing there watching the practice and you saw Daniel with his receivers go up in a 7-on-7 from the 10-yard line, throwing passes into the end zone, completing it in the end zone, that's great. But it's just a 7-on-7 drill, making a completion. Do you know what I'm saying? So he deserves credit for it, but it's not a touchdown the way that you guys would think it's impressive to throw a touchdown in a game, if that makes sense. But no, listen, Daniel's been working hard. And like I said, I think he's looked good out there, what I've seen so far. So I'm encouraged by his progress right now. Jay says, I think you guys will be pleasantly surprised this year. I've been watching since 87. Okay. Let's see. Chronicles asked Tuto if he's coming to the States this year for the Giants' 100th season. By the way, I told you guys, so this is another thing about our channel here. We break news here or give you information and nuggets that you haven't seen before on this channel when we have them. And like last chat we did, or 2 chats ago, I told you that I was hearing that the Giants were going to have like a celebration leading up to their first game, week 1 against the Vikings, but it was going to be like a fan fest weekend that week. And sure enough, the Giants announced it here today during OTA number 9. They announced that they're having a Friday fan fest, and then they have a 5K race on Saturday, followed by the game on Sunday. So they're doing this big lead up. I think I would expect like Giants legends to be involved in that, along with this June 20th event they have going on in Manhattan. The Giants are kind of trying to roll out the red carpet on the season. So, but we told you that here first. That was not out there. We reported that. Obviously, those of you who were on here subscribing around draft time, remember we were breaking news, whether it was the JJ McCarthy Michigan workout or other things. So, just remember, if you come in to these live chats, you're probably going to get unique information every time you're here. Sometimes it's going to be big breaking news. Sometimes it's going to be little pieces of nuggets about what's going on with the team, but you're always going to go. I promise you, you're always going to walk out of here knowing something you didn't know before you got here about the Giants. I can promise you that. D-Kit says, I should get a cut, Pat, just saying. Yes, you should, D-Kit. Yes, you should. It'll come back. Don't worry, D-Kit. We're going to do so much with this channel and with our events, and whether it's meetups, whether it's whatever, it's going to come back to you for sure. By the way, what I started saying earlier, and I think I got sidetracked. What I started saying earlier was, and this is for those of you who don't know, during the season, last year we started this. During the season, after every Giants game, I'm in the locker room every day after practice, right? I'm at every practice. I'm in the locker room after every practice. And then road or home games, I'm at every game in the stadium. And after the game, I go downstairs. I talk to Brian Daboll with the rest of the media. And then I go into the locker room. I talk to players. Some of it is in groups. Some of it is one-on-one. You're trying to get to information that you know is unique, that maybe you saw, other people didn't, whatever it was. And then I come up to the press box and I finish my story quickly for the Daily News. And then I jump on here and we do Talkin Ball live post-game from the stadium on whatever we saw and heard at the stadium, on the field, and in the locker room. Those Talkin Ball lives, I don't know who else is doing that in the league or on the beat or whatever the case may be, but I really think that is the most fun and most rewarding and most attractive thing that we do here. It is like Talkin Ball live on steroids, because it is us coming to you in the moment right away with our information that we learned right from the players' mouths, from the coaches' mouths, things we saw in the locker room, injury updates, everything coming right to you right away. Okay. So I really think like if you're not aware of what we do here and you're new here, that's something I think, especially as the season gets going, in addition to having the guests on our podcasts, creating these conversations. And also we do a lot of Giants here, but we don't do just Giants as well. So you'll see some podcast guests on here that we're not talking a ton of Giants. We might be talking Rams. We might be talking Eagles. We might be talking Niners. We might be talking Seahawks. We might be talking Chiefs, and talking to people in those organizations or around those organizations or other reporters who cover those organizations, trying to bring you everything that I can on the league and, using my network. Jay says, I kind of wish people would focus on winning football, save the stats for baseball. Well, to your point, Jay, wins are what matters. Like wins matter. That's what matters most. I mean, I think that's where I think we would all agree on that. Regardless of the stats, wins matter most. I think you're absolutely right. All right, let's get back into the queue here. Brett says, cut Waller, get a lineman. Bellinger and Theo Johnson will be beyond sufficient. That's okay. Confident in the tight ends there. OG says, I'm not putting it all on the O-line. Daniel Jones' QB play is trash, Pat. Daniel Jones holds on to the ball too long. Some of those sacks are on him. Daniel Jones gets more excuses than any other QB. He says, to be honest, it's only the Giants fans making excuses for him. Big Dash says it was 111 today. Oh, boy, in Arizona. Woo! Big Dash. Stay indoors. Yeah. Kyler says, a great band that I should check out is Cigarettes After Sex. All right, I'll check it out. Tudo says, Giants Chronicles. I don't think so. We're busy with our upcoming program and friendlies about coming to the States for the 100th. We ain't got any liberty to move around much. We're under contracts, buddy. Yeah, Tudo's part of that grind, man. Strider says, yo, Pat, on the last stream, I saw some dude mention Drew Brees coming out of retirement. Just to let you know, he has no feeling in his throwing arm, so he throws left-handed, dead arm. Yeah, Strider, that was like a really confusing comment. I think that person had misheard whatever he thought he had heard from Drew Brees during that press conference. So I was confused about that as well. But yeah, thanks for sharing that and clearing that up. Tudo says, Dash, we're not used to too hot climates, mate. Grew up in Jersey and currently in Europe, mostly with our program. Can't handle hot weather, mate. Bill says, next press conference, bring a milk crate and stick it under the podium so it's higher. We could actually hear what the players say. It's been a problem forever. I know, Bill. We were all getting frustrated today with that. A lot of guys speaking softly. Plus, they do the press conferences outside with airplanes flying overhead, and it's just not conducive to good media. So the Giants know that. I'm not sure why they don't alter it. Let's see. Tudo was back home in Princeton last week. That's true. Joey says, all this support and Pat has some strip club money. Make it rain, Pat. You guys are nuts. Strider says, also, as much as I'm excited about Nabers, the wide receiver, I'm really interested in Nubin. A part of me also wished McKinney stayed, and those two could have been awesome, but it was not meant to be. Yeah, would like to see more reps with the ones from Nubin. If you're drafting that guy in the second round, needs to play. Strider says he's super interested in the tight end pick. Hope it works out. Yeah, like I said, I think Theo Johnson can really help them right away as a blocker and then hopefully in the pass game as well. Strider says, I know Hyatt is a deep ball dude, but I personally feel he's one of those guys. He can run any route and stick it to the house. Well, he has to do it, right? I mean, he does have the speed. He's an exciting player. I love seeing him make that catch on that fourth down, taking a hit to make the play in Buffalo last year. But down the stretch after that New England game, largely his production completely disappeared. So, you want to see him take a next step. And listen, that happens with rookies, right? You see rookies shine or they pop or they flash, as people say, but it's not often, it's not typical that rookies come onto the scene, burst on and dominate. So that's fine, but you needed to take a step in year two. All right. Joey B says, how much does Shane Bowen's defensive scheme differ from Wink? And do you think Burns and Thibodeau will have more or less success in it? It is more four-man rush and coverage based in the back. Zone, keep the ball in front, rally and tackle. Martindale aggressive, blitzes more than Bowen will, even though Bowen will blitz. Though Martindale did play more zone than he typically does last year. Listen, you want to play man, but if you don't have guys who can play that man and that aggressive man where you're isolating those corners on an island, then you do have to play more zone. So the Giants did mix in more zone even last year. But, Banks said it himself today, Deontay Banks. He said, there's still some aggressiveness in this defense, but it's less aggressive than what Martindale ran. So he said, yes, there is more zone. Strider said, one of my main issues with Bowen is when he asked some of his best pass rushers to drop back in coverage. I hope he doesn't do that consistently. Yeah. So like I said, they do some of that dummy rusher stuff, right? Where they drop guys and then they send somebody else. I agree with you. You don't want to be doing that with Kayvon Thibodeau and Brian Burns. You're paying them to rush the quarterback. You do it you do it sparingly to try to throw people off, mainly depending on the matchups. But listen, this is one thing. You have to work pressures. You have to understand how the teams you're playing are running protections with their offensive line. You have to understand where they can be attacked and where their weaknesses are. That's complicated. That's something Wink Martindale did very well. So can Bowen do that? We'll see. Joey, to your point about how can Burns and Thibodeau do more or less success, I think, we'll see. To my point about the protections and matchups, not only the scheme, but also just opponent to opponent, series to series, down to down. How well will Bowen match up those players to have the best success, right? Like, for example, Dexter Lawrence, as a great talent himself, what helped unlock him was Wink Martindale gets here and moves him over the center, right? And makes him, the guy who is going to dominate every center in the league and says, like, there's no center in the league that can block this guy. We shouldn't be moving him around the defensive line. He needs to be the nose. And that unlocked everything, right? That was the final piece. And so can Shane Bowen do that with those edge rushers, depending on how he mixes and matches, what side they're playing on, how he schemes, pressures, and blitzes from other angles in order to isolate them on one-on-ones. I mean, I do think the good thing is for the edge rushers is that Dexter Lawrence should be commanding a lot of double teams. And so hopefully Burns and Thibodeau are able to take advantage of more one-on-ones. Antonio says, was Jordan Phillips the starter next to Lawrence during 7-on-7s? You mean 11-on-11, right? Because 7-on-7s is no lines, right? Not what I saw, though. I have to be honest, Antonio. There might have been snaps where he rotated in, but I don't recall seeing him a ton in that role, if at all. I recall seeing Davidson a lot. But I can't say, honestly, Antonio, like every single snap, I can't sit here and tell you he didn't mix in or how often he did or didn't, to be honest with you. But he was there. He was doing a lot of work with individuals with the D tackles and participating with the defense. But I don't recall. There wasn't a play where I have written down that he made a play as a defensive tackle today. Alex says, evening, Pat, checking in from Mobile, Alabama again. Just got off work. What's up, Alex? He says, first question, how is Drew Lock doing? Better. Today was the best practice I've seen from him so far. A lot of completions. He did have some off-target throws, but his receivers were helping him. Lawrence Cager was helping him, Malik Nabers, etc. But also he was giving Malik Nabers a chance. He was force-feeding his best weapon. He didn't seem to be hesitating running plays. Like, it was a very noticeable, the drop ball was noticeable anyway, but it was very noticeable that when Locke was in there, he seemed to be making pretty quick decisions or decisive decisions. And then DeVito came in and was pumping, patting the ball, not throwing it. He took off and ran on the first play because he didn't see anything down the field. Just some of the same old stuff that resulted in sacks last year. So I liked what I saw from Locke in this practice. Obviously 2 OTAs ago, the first open OTA practice we saw, number 3, I think it was, he really struggled, had a tough practice. So it's a really good practice today in OTA number 9 here on June 6th. Strider says, I agree. None of them, Pat. If KT blossoms and balls out, maybe, but the verdict is still out there. Yeah. As far as like first tier free agents. Yep. Bill says Jay is dominating this live stream. Yeah. Well, Jay, I'm blown away by it, but Jay has been, purchasing super chats consistently tonight and elevating his comments to the top of the queue. So I know we'll get through to everybody, but he's just been really balling out. And you're absolutely right. He's been bringing it. And I appreciate Jay and I appreciate everybody who has been checking in. Hold on. My light is flashing here. So I got to flick it off 1 second. If I don't properly charge those lights, or if I go too long or long enough on these chats, sometimes my lighting goes out, but all good. You can still see me. We're still here on Talkin Ball Live. And, it's just not that TV quality we had a few seconds ago, but we're all good. All right. Strider says Dak is a great QB. And then he says, gets pelted with snowballs. That was a joke. Yeah, that's funny. D-Kid says, do you think Daboll's out of character positive comments about Hyatt seem like an intentional early grooming that they are moving on from Slayton? I may be reaching, but he never praises anyone. D-Kid, I think with guys that Daboll needs to take another step, he's been speaking very highly of, like manifesting, speaking into existence type stuff. Like he has praised Cordell Flott more so than he normally does with players, just saying about how much he's looking forward to counting on him and what he's looking forward to from the player. As far as like winning the outside job, he was talking effusively about Hyatt. So I think the Giants have a lot of players this year. Like I said, there's a lot new about the team. And then also a lot of guys are returning. They're younger and they're looking for these players to take the next step, right? To some place they haven't gotten to yet in the NFL. So, I view it more as Daboll trying to reinforce through positivity his hopes for what those guys can accomplish. Brett M says 12-year-old kids are better boxing judges than what's on TV. One should also pick our draft positions next year. They would have picked a lineman or two after watching last season. No trenches. Yeah, I do think the lack of offensive line depth is glaring, and your point is made, Brett. Joey B says, what do you think of Sterling Shepard going to Tampa? You think he's got some juice left? If he does well and stays healthy, what does that say about our medical and training staff, or is it no reflection on us? Oh, that's interesting. Yes, absolutely. If he were to stay healthy for a full season, it would not reflect well on the Giants training and medical staff. There's no question about that. I think that's a really good point, Joey, that I hadn't thought of. I think, it's interesting. You have Sterling Shepard and Saquon Barkley both not returning to the Giants and going elsewhere in the same offseason. This is a player who the Giants were, like I reported originally around the owners' meetings in 2023, that the Giants envisioned like a long-term role in the organization with Sterling Shepard, right? And that's not to say it's still not going to happen. Like I still think that could happen. But at that point, it was like one of those things. Hey, we see a position for him with this organization where the building's just not the same without him. And that's John Mara all the way down, like organization's feelings about him. And like I said, I still think when all is said and done, the Giants are his home. That's where people most identify him with. And I still think that probably comes to fruition eventually. It wouldn't shock me, right? I know he's not Victor Cruz as far as what he's done on the field for the Giants, but in that, like Victor Cruz light type association representing the Giants in the community and being connected to them and working with them or working for them, that could happen down the road. But I'm happy for Shep. I mean, I told you guys on here, I think somebody asked me about whether he was retired and not playing again. And I said that I still thought there was a chance he was going to play. It wasn't clear exactly where. To hear him tell Josina Anderson, she posted a great interview with him on her X account. If you go check it out, if you haven't seen it. But from Shepard's vantage point, like everything just changed all at once. Baker Mayfield is Oklahoma quarterback and him kind of putting it together. And next thing you know, it's a workout and a 1-year deal. And now he's playing for the Buccaneers and headed to mandatory minicamp in Florida. So, I think it's good for him. I think the Giants, they basically organized a send-off for him, even though he hadn't officially retired or announced a retirement. So it was awkward. Last season was very awkward with him around. I mean, he was pretty much their most dominant receiver in training camp, and yet he couldn't get on the field. So they were definitely like, they were forcing his exit. And Shep, obviously, at a certain point, he was like getting in games where it was the fourth quarter and he got one target and he was putting too much pressure on himself to make a catch. And so he wasn't making some of those plays, but didn't feel like he was done. There were some things that didn't feel right about the way things ended for him here. So I'm glad he's getting a shot to kind of try to put it all together at the end. Antonio says, what are your thoughts about the Giants and Vikings week 1? What do you think? What do you think are going to be the key factors to winning that game? I think the things I'm looking at is right now I'm thinking about the defenses on both sides. So I'm thinking about Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison and Aaron Jones, and is the Giants defense right out of the gate going to be able to stop an offense with those weapons? Obviously, the quarterback situation being Sam Darnold and JJ McCarthy, that could be the path to the Giants defense finding success right off the bat, right? Those are quarterbacks that you would think, you would hope, you would believe, you would need your Giants defense to have some success against, at least limiting them, if not dominating them, right? But those are some serious weapons that you're facing. And then on the other side, I look at Brian Flores, a guy who is certainly going to be motivated for his unit to put their best on the field right away. Obviously, he's already got motivation to win an NFL game, but I think that's going to be a fascinating matchup. And of course, the Giants offensive line starting at home, going to be a lot of pressure on them to start right, to win that game, and to beat that team. So I think it's going to get high pressure situations early, even though that's not a like prime time or premier game right off the bat. Jay Farry says the Giants spent more than any team in free agency. Well, I guess sounds like you're including Brian Burns, and that Brian Burns not a free agent, but I see your point is that they made some splashes. Yeah, they made urgent moves, including that huge, aggressively desperate Brian Burns trade and signing, because there is pressure on this season. Farry's does not like Isaiah Simmons' game. Strider says, I think Simmons can be used as a QB spy. Yep. Farry says, if you leave him in a position, he will be exposed. That's right. Brett says, what week will Tay Banks return punts? Ridiculous. Right, like Adoree did. Let's see. Miz, what's going on? Good to see you. Strider says, just don't consistently ask our best pass rushers to drop in coverage. Yep. OG says, like, we shouldn't have hope or proof that Daniel's going to stay healthy and play well because we haven't seen that. He says, it's like asking Oprah to run a 4.3 40. It's not happening. Miz says, I believe Jones and the Giants surprised the league this year. Fight for a wild card in week 18. I like your optimism. Bearded Daniel Jones and the Giants fighting for a wild card. That's what you meant, Miz. Jonathan says, do you think Waller's hoping that he gets cut so he can play somewhere else? No. I mean, looking at everything he's been doing and how he's been exploring and clearly like working through a lot. Like I think as we've been sitting here talking, he posted a new post. He's basically been like on a hike in the desert, it almost seems like. And he just posted about men's mental health and a ton of pictures of him, sitting on rocks in the desert and essentially like, from my vantage point, working through his feelings and through his life. There's been a lot going on in his life, both in the past and in the present. And, listen, you can't put yourself in the shoes of somebody else, right? Fully. So, not trying to judge Darren Waller there, but I think he's done playing, Jonathan. Alex says, I wonder if cutting him or letting him retire nets us more cap space. It does. They will get cap space from that. Strider says, oh, right. Yeah, I saw that already. Yeah, no, we get it, OG. You just have a strong opinion. Daniel's not the guy. Yeah, nope. Yeah, we appreciate that. He says, I like Daniel Jones as a person, but he's not good as a first round 6 overall pick. People need to stop acting like he's putting up godly stats. I thought the Cowboys fans were delusional. No, and it's fair to say that this is what we're saying about some other parts of the Giants roster, and this goes for other teams, right? Like the Eagles defense, for example. They've added some pieces on defense, but they lost Fletcher Cox. They lost Jason Kelsey, center, right? Especially on defense, the way their defense looked last year. And yeah, they had two important corners there, two rookies, right? And you have to look at that and say, well, they're hoping it's going to be better. They're counting on it to be better, but is it, right? So just hope, Mike Lombardi actually says this on his podcast a lot. He says hope is not a strategy. And in the NFL, that is very true. Strider says Pat looking for consistency on the O-line and not making our O-line do musical chairs. It's really inconsistent. Very, very much agree. AJ says Waller looks like he has forgotten about football mandatory minicamp. Giants calling him on a phone, no answer. AJ, that's actually a really good point. It looks like he's completely unplugged. I think that's a fair potential reality that you could take away from looking at it. Strider says, I was hoping Runyon Jr. would be left guard. Kind of disappointed he's at right guard. He played his best at left guard for Green Bay before he's moved to the right guard. Yeah, interesting to continue to monitor, Strider. I don't disagree with you there. I think it seems clear that, as Runyon was asked today, it seems clear that the Giants are hoping that he can help steady those two young guys in Schmitz and Neal and help bridge the gap there. By the way, for Father's Day, great Father's Day gift here, or just in general, Future Fans Football, futurefans.com. It's a great way to teach your kids the game if they don't know it already. Go check it out, futurefans.com. Be a good Father's Day gift, or gift for your children if they're really looking to get into the game, learn about it, going into training camp, things like that. Also, we're sponsored by State 98 Coffee. It's an Esencia de Cafe from El Salvador. Dates back to 1798. Takes 3 seconds to make a nice coffee. I drink it all the time when I'm doing the Talkin Ball podcast. Not these late night Talkin Ball lives, though. I'm not trying to stay up all night. D-Kit says, Pat, let's think about how many points per game we scored in both 2022 and 2023. What do you think Nabers' impact on scoring will be on the points per game? Well, D-Kit, I think, remember, even though Saquon obviously not every week was the player that you needed him to be, or the offense wasn't scoring big just because he was on the team, I think like if Nabers was here and Saquon was still here, I think I would have more confidence in predicting a huge rise in points per game, because like I think back to like, what was it, 2 years ago when Saquon and Dexter Lawrence just took over against the Bears and dominated them. They had no answer, right? And the Bears just like two players essentially ruined the game for Chicago as the visitors. And if you think about a team and a game like that, where Saquon is that difficult to handle, and then you add a Malik Nabers type explosive receiver, now you have the defense's head in a blender and they have no answers, right? And you're stretching the ball across the field. If you're running the ball, maybe they're overly keyed on Nabers, or maybe they're overly keyed on Saquon in the box, and now you have Nabers free, right? So Nabers being added, listen, it's going to be hard for them to score as few points as they did last year. I think they probably end up somewhere in the middle of those two numbers you just gave. Like you're hoping you need to be at 20 points per game compared to last year, right? You hope it's more than that. I think it's hard to predict a touchdown more a game, right? Which would be, like 23 points a game or so. It's hard to predict a touchdown more a game just based on Nabers being added when you took away the best offensive player existing on the offense, but then added him. Because right now, I don't think they have a running game that's going to force teams to stack the box right now. It's not what I see. So, I guess my answer to you is around 20 maybe, or just under. D-Kid says Bellinger was a 4th-round pick in 2022. They drafted over him, so if he gets supplanted as the starter, I would consider this another miss. Yeah, right. Yes, exactly, D-Kid. Yes, Jay Farries, I predicted 4-13. OG says, show me 3 back-to-back games where Daniel Jones threw 300 yards and put up at least 7 touchdowns in a 3-game stretch. History is going to prove the Giants made a mistake in drafting and paying him. Brett loves Jay Farries, Daniel Jones. Jay Farris points out Trent Williams went down and the Niners lost several games in a row. AJ says it is important that the Giants find a backup for Singletary and don't run him into the ground when closing out games. No doubt. Brett says we had a good first drive, then a bad snap. Summarizes the whole season regarding the Dallas game. Definitely, but it's not an excuse for like what happened in week 2, week 3, week 4, week 5, right? Like they had plenty of games that they still should have won. OG says 5-12, top 5 pick in the draft in 2025. That's what his prediction is. Farry says, where is Bryce Ford Wheaton? Ford Wheaton looks pretty good. He's got size out there. He made a tough catch today on the sideline. I like what I've seen so far. I want to keep seeing him growing. El Jefe says, have you heard that cover of the Darren Waller song? Oh, yeah, Jefe. That was you, right? That's another content creator that I like is El Jefe. Jefe, a bunch of us were watching that in the media room today and laughing about it because it really was good content. Farry says, I like your brutal honesty about the business. OG says, Pat, do you think the Lions would trade Hendon Hooker? And do you think he's worth a 2025 pick? Dak might be an option for the Giants next year. They say Trey Lance is looking better. I don't think Lance is going to be the guy. Dak could be an option. No indications yet that the Lions would move on from Hooker, but going to continue to watch that as the summer goes, as the joint practices come up. You hope maybe, if you're flipping a guy like Slayton, if it comes to that, though, obviously it doesn't look like that's where they're going anymore with that, though that could depend on how camp goes. But the Lions do appear to need a receiver, but it does seem like the Slayton trade idea has kind of sailed in the sense because they do need depth there and talent there. So I think Hooker ends up staying with the Lions at this point. You pay Jared Goff, but now you have that young quarterback who also is older and, gets healthier, can learn the offense. If you already have your next guy and a capable backup in the building, I mean, you need a capable backup in the NFL. And if it's somebody who can possibly be your next franchise quarterback for Detroit, even better. Joey B said, I'm glad you did this tonight because game 1 of the NBA finals is trash. Noel Daly says, Pat, what's going on, bro? What are your impressions of Carmen Brasillo? Have you observed anything in practice or anything he said that differentiates him from Bobby Johnson? Noel, only that he talked about like changing some things that they've done in the past. Like he mentioned like different hand placements. He mentioned even working with Andrew Thomas on changing some things. So he and Bobby have a relationship. Definitely clear, though, that they're going to do some things differently, though he won't go into all these specifics about it. He did say a couple times that Brian Daboll, as well as himself and James Ferentz, the assistant O-line coach, are all involved in it. So Daboll is going to be very involved in the changes that you see, right? Obviously, he's the head coach, but as the expected play caller, right? And with his job on the line, that's something that is inevitable as well. By the way, I got an interesting email today. Let's see. This is courtesy of. So I got an email. It was like a PR email from a communications company. So they said a website, betohio.com, has the odds for the next head coach fired in the NFL. And Robert Saleh's odds are the highest at plus 350 as the first head coach fired. Then it's Matt Eberflus and Mike McCarthy at the Bears and Cowboys at plus 450 apiece. Then it's Dennis Allen of the Saints at plus 700. And then it's Brian Daboll of the Giants at plus 1250, followed by Sean McDermott, Nick Sirianni at plus 1500. So that's odds for next coach fired. All right, let's get back into the queue here. Thank you all for being patient. Thank you all for your super chats. Thank you all for hitting the like button. If you're not doing anything else tonight, please hit that like button while we are live. It helps drive engagement and really helps us here continue to build this community that is continued to grow and grow. Noel, I'm hoping that as we continue to go here and talk about the Giants into training camp, and we see more on the field and we hear more from Brasillo and the players, that we'll be able to dive deeper in some of the changes to expect up front. Alex, I was drinking Hill Rock from New York bourbon, but it is essentially finished now. Cheers. D-Kid says he's betting that the O-line week 1 will be Thomas at left tackle, Runyon left guard, JMS center, Stinney right guard, and Illuminor right tackle. Interesting. I think if those are the 5, I'd say it's going to be Runyon right guard and Stinney left guard. But I don't disagree with you that that's a possibility. Bill says Jay Farries is personally paying for your next bottle of bourbon tonight, Pat. No doubt. Jay says there's a lot more there. Just happy to hear some honesty and not bullshit. Brett says Josh Azudu drafted round 3 as a left guard. Illuminor is our best right guard. What in the Sam hell is going on? Continuity might start a week before the first game. Carmen Brasillo did say, like my impression of him, he did make clear that he wants to see a solidified front 5. He said you'll see him tinkering with stuff maybe early in training camp, but it definitely sounded like he wants things settled down early, right? Like he said something like as we get deep into training camp, if it's not settled, he'll feel unsettled. But I definitely think like we've seen enough consistency from the front right now with Illuminor left guard, Runyon right guard, and JMS center, Andrew left tackle. I think we've seen enough consistency there to know that it's either going to be those 4 and Neal, or if Neal doesn't work out, that Illuminor kicks to right tackle. And then as D-Kit just said, Stinney jumps in and probably to left guard. OG says, excuses for Daniel Jones. Eli Manning, who took bigger hits than Jones over his career, still put up great stats with tight touchdowns and 2 Super Bowls. O-line in the last Super Bowl was trash. Alex says, I love learning all the Pat Leonard lore. I feel like you've done so many interesting things. When is the autobiography dropping? Good point. I just got to talk all that into a Word document right there that we did during this live chat. That was fun. Bill and I, great minds. Brett M says Daniel is pissed with the beard. Hell yeah, no doubt. Daniel Jones villain arc would be hilarious. Oh my God. Janiel Dones is hilarious. Mike Jones says, yeah, and actually, I'll be totally honest, like calling him Janiel Dones, maybe I would have come up with that with on my own, but I have to admit, I have to give a shout out too. So I posted the Daniel Jones beard picture on Instagram and on X. And one of the first comments under it was a guy named Chris Malatrat. He posted, that's Janiel Dones, bro, underneath it. And so I kind of ran with that. So I got to give Chris credit on that. Yeah, Bill loves that. Bill says, Jay Farris, you got 2 in the chat right now with Big Dash and Hell Hefe. Can't recommend them enough. Yep, exactly. Big Dash appreciates the shout out. Let's see. No doubt, Big Dash. Pat, it would be awesome if you did a video with Marshall Green of Giants Now. Oh, okay. You like what Marshall produces as well, Alex? Okay. Jay Farry says, you guys act like anyone on Giants Twitter has a real job. No, Jay, it's not, it's not that serious, man. Like, it's more like a passion, And so some of us get paid to do it. Some of us are doing it out of just passion and as a side project, right? And talking about the Giants, but not covering them out there like at the facility every day. Like everybody's chipping in differently. It just creates a conversation in the community, right? OG says all the QBs in the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s took bigger hits than Daniel Jones. Joe Burrow took more hits, went to the Super Bowl. Daniel looked good in 4 mini camps and sucked in the season. All right. Big Dash says there's a good community of guys out here that love the Giants. Respect to all of them. No doubt, Big Dash. Jay Farry says, I had eggs thrown at me with Eli. Oh, there you go. Bill says San Diego is awesome, Pat. The Midway Carrier Museum is great, and Rockin' Baja Lobster is one of my favorite places to eat. Okay. OG recommends to watch Tim from Online Big Blue. Always keeps it real about the Giants. Jay Farry says you might not be told what you want to hear. D-Kid says, I honestly think the Talkin Ball post-game chat will explode. Very much looking forward to it. Yeah, no, D-Kid, because you guys know, like during games and right after games, yeah, like some people put some stuff on Twitter or whatever, but like even if I post one or two things on Twitter that we learn right after the game that are pressing, I come into those with my notebook full of information that hasn't gone anywhere yet. And you're going to learn about it live right there on YouTube as I sit there in the press box, basically looking out on the field, talking to you guys, looking out at the empty field, talking to you guys. It's a blast. I really do think it's going to explode too, D-Kid. I agree. Jay says, a lot of your music movie answers were not answers. Absolutely not. I told you my favorite movie, and I told you like 3 of my favorite bands, and I told you Illmatic was one of my favorite albums, and Black on Both Sides by Mos Def. I mean, hey, man, sorry. I tried. Yeah, OG, no doubt. You are doubting Daniel Jones highly. We hear you. Bootney DeFonsworth says, do you think Malik Nabers can save Daniel Jones's job? Yeah, listen, he's a force multiplier. And that's what we talked about at the beginning of this live chat, which is that Justin Jefferson's getting paid $35 million because a player who is that special at the receiver position in the modern NFL can change a team, right? And listen to some of these stats on how critical wide receivers can be for an offense, okay? So I crunched these numbers the other day. 9 of the NFL's top 10 wide receivers in yards last year led their teams to the playoffs. So only one of the NFL's top wide receivers last year missed the playoffs. It was DJ Moore from Chicago, okay? The number 6 overall in yards, in receiving yards. The NFL's, they rank by scoring offenses, just like points per game and total points. The top 8 NFL scoring offenses all went to the playoffs, and 12 of the top 15 offenses went to the playoffs. And the only 2 playoff teams that didn't have a top 15 offense were the Buccaneers, who have a top 10 receiver in Mike Evans, and the Steelers. So listen, obviously it's age old to talk about, and it's true that there's plenty of star receivers that even if their offenses were good, the teams were good, they didn't win Super Bowls, right? Like Randy Moss didn't win a Super Bowl. Julio Jones didn't win a Super Bowl. Larry Fitzgerald. But like Fitzgerald and Jones both went to Super Bowls and balled out in the Super Bowls and the playoffs and still lost, right? Randy Moss was on the best offense, basically one of the best offenses ever, had one of the greatest receiving seasons ever, went to the Super Bowl undefeated, obviously loses to the Giants. But, obviously there's various examples, right? On the other hand, you have the Chiefs trading Tyreek Hill, they still win. But don't they technically still have a number 1 wide receiver in Travis Kelce? You can call him a tight end, but he's the number 1 wide receiver. And listen, a lot of the NFL's best offenses right now, especially like the Eagles and the Dolphins, the way that they have taken the league by storm offensively in the last couple of years, specifically the Eagles 2 years ago, Dolphins last year, it was 2 stud wide receivers that defenses just struggle to handle. Like even last year, they didn't go to the playoffs, but the Raiders, obviously they have a quarterback problem. But like, think about the Raiders, the Bengals. Who's the other team? It was the Raiders, Bengals, and the Vikings. 3 teams who had quarterback issues last year, but all of them, Addison Jefferson, Higgins, Chase, and Devontae Adams and Jacoby Myers in the Raiders. These teams are really difficult to defend. Like the bottom line is that it's not always going to fix things, Bootney, but a star wide receiver can change an offense, change a team. And certainly Odell Beckham Jr., the most recent example in New York of like when I came on the beat, the Giants went to the playoffs in 2016 with a great defense and an offense that was virtually doing nothing outside of just getting the ball to Odell Beckham Jr. every now and then and having him take it to the house, right? So that's what it can do for you. And yes, it is possible he could save him. Jay Farry says, Pat is running through this and going to finish it up in a bit. Hey, we get through it every night. No matter how long it takes, we get through all the questions. I really appreciate you guys spending the time of being here. And so we always get through them. OG says stats do matter because you're not winning many Super Bowls with QBs like Trent Dilfer and Brad Johnson, to be honest. He says he's from Patterson, Englewood, New Jersey, living in Austin, Texas, and it was 107, super hot. Oh, wow. Yeah. D Kid says, Pat, can you give a Alex Johnson update? The UCLA slot corner, is he running with the twos? He is, though. D Kid, I asked Daboll about what he thinks of Johnson, and he did not really praise him at all. He basically said, look, we're just running these. He said, look, we're just running these guys through, trying to give them opportunities. I'll tell you his answer right here. I asked him about what has impressed you about Alex Johnson. Daboll said, with all these guys, we're really just rotating a lot of different people. And if they do good in one practice, we give them some more reps, but we're switching. That's what this time of year is for, relative to giving them as much as they can handle, move them around, see how they communicate with other players within the system. And once training camp hits, obviously the closer it gets, the more you want to be set where you want to be. So I read that answer as, we've seen some flashes, but it's too early for him to sit here and say this guy has been blowing us away, if that makes sense. But obviously, playing with the twos is encouraging. You hope it continues. Joe says, Pat, do you have a sense of the mood in the Eagles camp in the wake of their drop-off last year and retirements? I know I saw there was a strange comment by Jalen Hurts today. It was about, let me see. I had it right here. I wrote it down earlier. So Jalen Hurts today was asked about whether Nick Sirianni has been open-minded to change in the offense. And Hurts said something to the effect of, it's a great question. I don't know the answer to it. So there's been a lot of noise and talk around the league about Hurts and about his leadership and about whether the Eagles can rebound and whether their problems are bigger than what people realize. And, listen, can Kellen Moore fix their offense? I mean, Dallas Chargers, is he going to be able to use Saquon Barkley correctly? How are they going to operate? Right. So I think there's a belief they're talented, but there's still uncertainty, right? Like Nick Sirianni right now, he's a head coach, but he's not calling the plays on offense. He's not calling the plays on defense. I think the Eagles defense, the mood there, it sounds like the defense is doing well. It sounds like the offense has been scuffling a little bit. I think their offensive line is going to be good. How is there going to be a drop off without Kelsey? You have to imagine they're going to miss him. How big is that drop off? So I think there's some uncertainty there. I don't sense that they are as worried as maybe you would think they might be coming off the end of a season like they just had. But I think there should be cause for them to feel like they have to reprove it and earn it again, because they're certainly not the team they were 2 years ago. And they were one of the worst teams. They were playing like arguably the worst team in the NFL by the time their season had ended last year, which was really shocking and jarring. So I definitely think there's some cracks in the armor there, from what I gather. But it's going to depend on the quarterback and on the head coach there. That's for sure. I do think though, still, Joe, it's like, I wrote this for the Daily News, but isn't it just something that Sirianni can come out and just talk that kind of trash and say, oh yeah, we got the Giants' best player, and Daboll really wouldn't respond to it today. But the fact of the matter is, like, the Giants just don't treat the Giants aren't treated with any respect by the Eagles, because the Eagles have had their way with them and the Cowboys have had their way with them. And the Giants have to earn that back. And maybe they can this year. Maybe the Eagles are going to slide. We'll see. Alex says, light is off. Now it's late night with Pat Leonard. That's true. Late night live with Pat Leonard. Talking ball. Let's go. OG says, Pat, Cowboys fans laugh at us Giants fans out here in Texas. They all ask me, when is Daniel Jones going to beat them? Yeah, no, to your point, not just the Eagles, Cowboys too. Justin says, thank you for all your great coverage, Pat. Thank you, Justin. He says, sorry if you covered this. I joined late, but how healthy is Daniel Jones looking so far? Will he be restricted in training camp? Justin, he looks really good. Like today, after running 7-on-7, he's over there running sprints, working with the training staff, getting up a crazy sweat, throwing extra passes, like Isaiah McKenzie, working with him. I've seen him at practices rolling out, planning, looking good on that leg. We've seen him running. So to me, he looks like he's building towards no restrictions at some point in camp. I don't know how early in camp that'll happen. I mean, he looks good to me, but certainly it's different once you have an offensive line and a pass rush coming at you and you have to navigate the pocket. And of course, if your goal is to get him to week 1 healthy, you need to put him in there and have him play real football too. So you want to keep him fresh and make sure he's healthy, but you need to have him actually play. So at some point, you need to just take the training wheels off. But it's still tracking for him to be the week 1 starter, healthy enough to be the week 1 starter there. If the O-line is top 16, Giants have a 50% chance of making wild card. If they're bottom 5, 5% chance of making the playoffs, says H5000. I don't think it's just the O-line, but I agree with you that their O-line being capable gives them a chance to have a capable offense, and them having a poor O-line or injury-riddled O-line like they had last year gives them no shot at all. OG points out that Evan Ingram stunk with the Giants, but he's good in Jacksonville. What does that say about the Giants? That's usage. That's also once things got bad, Ingram, the noise got to him and the fans kind of soured on him, and it wasn't a good fit in the end. Sometimes change of scenery is necessary. That's what they needed for sure. Or that's what he needed. Bill says, Waller's out in the desert. Does he have a horse with no name? AJ, you got it. T says H5000, what great ass pull stats. Kudos. T says Nabers plus Saquon plus Kelsey, etc. Yeah, that'll help. Mike says, do you think Devin Singletary will fit in well? A good player. I don't think he forces defenses to key on him, right? To fill the box and put an 8th guy in the box, that kind of thing. But he is a good player who can catch the ball and pass protect, and he's smart and reliable. But he doesn't fix their running back position himself, right? Need more there. Brett says, what would your starting O-line be, Pat? Thomas, Neal, JMS, Runyon, Illuminor? I think it would be Thomas, Stinney, JMS, Runyon, Illuminor. But it's hard because, is Evan Neal a swing tackle, right? Can he do that? Their depth is concerning. Chronicles says, how much has Allen Robinson been involved? He's been working with the reserves. So nothing flashy yet from Robinson and nothing meaningful with the first team. Mark says, Pat, what do you think an 8-win, no playoff season does for this regime? Buy them another year? If they win 8 games and their offense looks capable and they can show, and you can point to a lot of legitimate and not propaganda positive growth with young players, but legitimate that everybody can see growth with young guys on the roster, then I think, that buys you more time, especially if the quarterback position looks either figured out or significantly improved. I don't know if there's a playoff mandate. I think right now there's just a competent football and coaching behavior mandate. You know what I mean? It's way simpler than that. Brett, yes, Chase Cota made a couple catches today with the reserves. What happened to Khalil Pimpleton? I think he's in the CFL. Looks like he's on the Ottawa Red Blacks of the Canadian Football League. Ottawa, former stomping grounds in the NHL. D-Kit says, indulge me. It's likely that Daniel Jones won't participate in live contact drills this entire preseason, making developing a rapport with his wide receivers very tough. Would they really put him out there week 1? It's a good question, D-Kit. I mean, I will say this. Today it stood out to me, and this is something I'm going to be writing for the Daily News too. Thanks for asking this. As we're past 2.5 hours now here on Talkin Ball Live. A fantastic chat tonight, guys. It dawned on me as I'm watching Locke connect with Nabers and Nabers dominate and Locke have a better practice than ones I've seen previously. I'm thinking to myself, man, is he getting a lot of reps with the ones, right? Like Drew Lock's running the first team offense all offseason, right? Or at least all spring. So that's a fair point. I mean, but they do have $40 million a year invested in Daniel Jones, right? So that's the other thing. That's another reason why I think, because Daniel looks good physically. I personally think even if they put restrictions on the plays, you give Daniel Jones some, how do I put it? Some well-planned 11-on-11 snaps and mandatory minicamp to make sure he hits that marker there and have him feeling good and getting that experience. And you're not waiting till July to do it with the full team D-kit. That would be what I would say. But I think you make a very fair point. Listen, we've talked about it before. I reported it before. John Schneider said it publicly too. Drew Lock came here because he was told he would have a chance to compete for the starting job. And so he said all the right things. They're saying he's the backup. Daniel Jones is the investment, but you have to keep watching this. You have to keep watching it. I mean, listen, Daniel Jones is still the more talented quarterback, and he's still the investment. But that doesn't mean that Drew Lock's just here to sit around and be a backup quarterback. Big Dash says, shout out to Tim from Online Big Blue. Big Dash says, I was surprised to see Carter Coughlin get the snaps with McFadden on the sideline today. Yeah, well, Carter, honestly, I didn't think Carter Coughlin was going to resign here. A new defensive coordinator who is now looking like he's going to give him real inside linebacker snaps is the reason he's back. So if he wasn't going to get snaps on defense here, he was going to go try somewhere that was going to play him there. Brett says 2 words, Wan'Dale Robinson. Thanks, Pat. Joe says, I love Tim as well. There are many of us in Goofy Land, and we fan on. AJ says, funny how much of a difference a year makes. Sterling Shepard was supposed to have a role with the Giants last year, but did nothing. Now he signs with the Bucs while the Giants draft Nabers. Well, they pretty much like pushed Shep out. I mean, he had a great camp. They just really didn't want him on the field. But yeah, not the same class of player there either, investment. Listen, I like that you brought up Nabers, because let's wrap back up where we started. The story of the day, outside of Daniel Jones's alter ego villain beard, Daniel Jones, was Malik Nabers starring, showing out, being a game breaker, looking like a force multiplier that can help everybody on the Giants offense and hopefully on the Giants team. And again, remember, we're not just talking about 2024 when we talk about Malik Nabers. We're talking about, hey, maybe this is the kind of player that can really be a building block for the Giants to become an annually competitive NFL team in offense and attract players to sign here and make them sustainably good one day again, right? So that's where we're going to leave off. D-Kit says, Pat, great job tonight. It gets better every pod. Thanks. I agree. This was a really strong chat. Thank you, everybody, for supporting. Bill says, I agree with you, Pat. Shep will be back in the building after a year. Mara will find a place for him. Bill says, great show again, Pat, as usual. Thank you. D-Kit says, Daniel Jones should grow the beard out like ZZ Top. That would be intense. I would love it. Thank you to everybody, especially super chatters. Jay Farries, you really brought it tonight. Really appreciate it. Ryan, D-Kit, Chris, Tuto, J-Jan, Big Dash telling everybody, and Jacob telling everybody to hit the like button and to subscribe. Mike Ross, Bill Hartnett. Hope I'm not leaving anybody out, but I am genuinely thrilled about what we've grown here, and thank you so much. AJ says, great job, Pat. Nice show. Joey B fell asleep and woke up, and I was still going, Joey B. Good night, everybody. Justin, thank you. Thank you for everybody for being on this chat. Remember, we typically do these Mondays and Thursdays, 9 p.m. I'll keep you apprised on X. We'll do some special stuff next week around mandatory minicamp. Maybe do an impromptu live right from East Rutherford coming off the field one of the days on YouTube. Stay tuned for that. But thank you for tuning in to Talkin Ball Live. If you're listening on Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast, thank you as well. Remember, subscribe to the YouTube channel, PL on NFL. We will see you next time on Talkin Ball Live. Justin, Marjorie, take care. Enjoy.